Chapter 187, Credit Limit of 1 billion. The eldest imperial prince breathed out a gasp of relief. The other bidder had finally raised the bid and now, his 20 million was safe. Ling Han laughed, and said, "Old dog, if I suddenly changed my mind and decided not to continue bidding now, would you instantly faint from the shock?" "Hung, that is only a mere 20 million. It's not a big enough sum of money yet that I would consider it seriously." In such a public setting, there was no way that Chen Yunxiang would abandon his face and cower, so he instantly calmed his heart and countered in a steady tone. "This esteemed guest of the third floor, are you going to make a bid?" "If you are not, then please do not interrupt," the auctioneer reminded. "Of course, I am. Money is merely an earthly possession." Ling Han smiled. 30 million. Pooh. The eldest imperial prince had just taken a sip of tea to calm himself down from such a scare, but when he heard the bid of 30 million, he instantly spat out the mouthful he had just drank. Thankfully, he managed to turn his head in the nick of time. Otherwise, if he had actually spat out the mouthful of tea on the female attendant waiting on him, then his reputation would really be completely ruined. Cough, cough, cough. He coughed uncontrollably, his whole face completely red, and said, "Young Master Han, did you just make a bid of 30 million? "That's right. I assumed that, with the wealth of your Imperial Highness, a loan of 30 million would simply be a light drizzle to you," Ling Han said, laughing. "Drizzle your sister. That was 30 million silver coins we're talking about here, not 30 million drops of rain." "Young Master Han, are you trying to kill me?" the eldest imperial prince asked grudgingly. If Ling Han was not able to produce that sum of money, would this debt fall on his head? That was very possible, since they were in the same private room. 30 million, just the thought of it caused the eldest imperial prince's face to turn black. He would be able to earn only 10 million after 5 years. Hee. Ling Han smiled, but did not explain. In the private room on the second floor, Sun Ziyan laughed loudly, and said, "This spoilt profligate master, how idiotic. He has simply dumped 30 million into the water just like that. Ha ha ha, come, continue the bidding." Chen Yunxiang also looked at Sun Ziyan with hidden bitterness in his eyes. "One word from you, and I have to increase the bid?" That was 30 million here. If Ling Han really decided not to continue bidding, then he would have to sell off at least 1/3 of the properties under the Chen clan's ownership. By that time, he would be even less able to sustain Ling Han's malicious low-priced competition. 31 million. Chen Yunxiang said through gritted teeth. After making this bid, he could feel his heart was beating unusually fast, as if it was about to jump out of his throat. He had been alive for so many years, but had never spent 30 million in one go like this. No, he had never even spent 10 million in one go like this. Such a sum caused all the blood to rush to his head, and his face was completely red. It was possible that his head would explode at any moment. The eldest imperial prince once again let out a breath in relief. When he stretched out a hand to rub his forehead, there was actually cold sweat on his forehead. 30 million, not just him, maybe even the current Reign Emperor would have to consider seriously before spending such a sum of money. It was great that there was an idiot who decided to pick up the baton. He stared at Ling Han and decided that if Ling Han showed any hint of continuing to bid, he would act to stop the latter. Ling Han smiled. If he decided to stop bidding now, Chen Yunxiang would definitely want to die. This was a very good opportunity to destroy the Chen clan, but Ling Han did not want to miss out on those 3 swift cloud talismans because of this. 40 million. As swift as a sudden clap of thunder which leaves no time for covering one's ears, he made a new bid. With a paw, the chair under the eldest imperial prince's backside actually shattered. This was because he was too agitated, and lost control of his origin power that slipped out of his body. The loss of control over his origin power actually shattered a chair made of high-grade sandalwood. Young Master Han, your joke is too much. The eldest imperial prince shook his head. He was definitely unable to produce an astronomical sum of 40 million. Thus, if the Spirit Treasures Pavilion came forward forcefully to ask for their payment, he would only be able to draw a clear line between himself and Ling Han. Anyways, it was Ling Han who had made the bids, so of course, the money should come from him. He was feeling on edge here, while over there, Chen Yunxiang naturally gasped out in relief. This time round, he was not going to increase the bid anymore, no matter what. When Sun Ziyan saw this, a cold smile curled up the corners of his lips, and he said, "Mister, I'd like to ask, if one who had made a bid cannot produce the payment, how would the issue be handled?" Naturally, according to the rules of our pavilion, the offender would have his cultivation completely crippled, and not be allowed to step into the Spirit Treasures Pavilion forever, the auctioneer immediately replied. Good. Sun Ziyan humphed coldly, and said, "I suspect that honored guest on the third floor is unable to produce this sum of money, and has been engaging us in a malicious price war all this while." The auctioneer's eyes grew grim. "Since young Master Sun has spoken such doubts, then let me go to confirm." He turned around and left, walking into the backstage area. The face of the eldest imperial prince instantly darkened. If they were chased out of here because of involvement in a malicious price war, what would be left of his reputation? Wait, this brat could not have purposely done it, right? Purposely causing public shame to him, and helping his third younger brother to clear all the obstacles in his path. He had just barely finished that thought, when he saw that the auctioneer had returned. The latter said, "I have just confirmed with one of the senior officials of our pavilion. That esteemed guest is definitely able to produce 40 million. Additionally, even if that esteemed guest does not have a single copper coin on him, our pavilion is willing to give him a credit limit of 1 billion. Pooh. 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 Everyone choked, and began to cough uncontrollably. A credit limit of 1 billion, what kind of concept was that? Ling Han did not have to spend a single cent and would be able to simply take home an auction item worth 1 billion, as the Spirit Treasures Pavilion would advance funds for him first. Such an honor. Would even the clan heads of the 8 great clans be able to enjoy this honor? The eldest imperial prince was gaping widely in shock, a powerful astonishment in his eyes. The Spirit Treasures Pavilion looked too highly on Ling Han, didn't they? They not only gave him the use of a private room on the 3rd floor, but even gave him a credit limit of 1 billion. When he thought about it, even he felt extreme envy at such priority treatment. Ling Han smiled calmly, and said, "Since my wealth is confirmed, then to be fair, your wealth should be confirmed as well. I am also suspicious whether you two are really poor and simply engaging me in a malicious price war." When these words were heard, Sun Ziyan and Chen Yunxiang's expressions instantly changed. They were definitely unable to produce 30 million in cash. "I am a member of the Sun clan. So how could it be possible that I would not be able to produce a mere 30 million? Sun Ziyan said very forcefully. If these words were spoken by the clan head of the Sun clan, that's fine. But for a mere junior of the clan, being able to produce 3 million would already be impressive enough. Someone laughed mockingly. It was of course one of Sun Ziyan's rivals. That's right. It must be investigated. Otherwise, it would not be fair. Another person joined in on the excitement. A young and quick-tempered person like Sun Ziyan would have naturally made quite a few enemies. However, most of them would waver in the face of the power of each other's respective clans and not push the issue. Thus, at this time, there were of course people ready to hit him when he was down. "Please cooperate, young Master Sun," the auctioneer said. Since Ling Han's wealth was confirmed, then it was natural that Sun Ziyan and Chen Yunxiang had to be investigated as well. Otherwise, it would not be fair. The most important thing in the auction was to be fair, and what everyone hated the most was a malicious price war. Immediately, someone from the Spirit Treasures Pavilion entered into the private room of Sun Ziyan and Qinyun Xiang. After a while, the auctioneer said, "From the results of our investigation, the total sum of cash that young Master Sun and old Master Chen can pay is 9 million, which is very far from their bid of 30 million. When these words were heard, quite a number of people smirked coldly. If they were not elites of spiritual ocean tier, and had come specifically for the foundation building pills, who would actually have more than 10 million on them? This time, Sun Ziyan had really ruined his whole reputation. Sun Ziyan and Qinyun Xiang were immediately cast out of the Spirit Treasures Pavilion. Because it was Qinyun Xiang who had made the bids, and he did not have any form of cultivation at all, there was no cultivation to be crippled. However, there was no way that the two of them would be allowed to enter into the Spirit Treasures Pavilion again for the rest of their lives. Chapter 188, Sky High Price. Because there was a malicious price war involved, the previous bidding was naturally discarded. Ling Han once again made a bid, and managed to easily purchase the 3 Swift Cloud Talismans at 10 million. Practically no one made a counterbid, because they were all aware of Ling Han's wealth. He did not even blink and simply threw out a bid of 40 million like that, and what was even more terrifying was his credit limit of 1 billion. If anyone actually offended him, then when something that they wanted came up in the auction and Ling Han actually joined in on the bidding, who would be able to compete? Very soon, a representative from the Spirit Treasures Pavilion delivered the 3 Swift Cloud Talismans over. As for money, he naturally had no need to pay. It would be the Spirit Treasures Pavilion who would be giving Ling Han money. The eldest imperial prince was both astonished and curious. Where had Ling Han gotten so much money from, and how had he gotten such serious attention from the Spirit Treasures Pavilion? He had naturally done his own investigation on Ling Han's background. Aside from that short time period shortly after his birth, this guy was a complete village boy. In the bounds of the imperial city, the Ling clan did not even qualify as an actual clan. But Ling Han suddenly rose up, and his rise took more or less only about half a year. This was really a miracle that no one could see through at all. The auction continued. After a few unremarkable small items, the 3rd foundation building pill finally appeared on the stage in a glorious display. The eldest imperial prince finally decided to throw everything into the gamble this time round. However, there were many others who had the same thought as him, and very quickly, the bidding price of the alchemical pill was pushed up to the high price of 20 million. The eldest imperial prince could only stare and secretly regret how he had not decisively acted the previous 2 times. And now, he couldn't even get one pill with his 20 million. The Spirit Treasures Pavilion seemed to practically sell anything one could think of. Not just alchemical pills and decorative items, they also sold various ingredients, cultivation techniques, and martial arts techniques. There were even treasure maps mixed in. However, there were no spirit tools up for auction this time round. Otherwise, Ling Han would really want to get one of his own. Because the martial arts and cultivation techniques that were on auction were really too low grade, Ling Han naturally did not have the slightest interest. He was practically nodding off where he was sitting. Anyways, he needed not buy the foundation building pills at all. The 4th pill, the 5th pill, and the 6th pill were quickly auctioned off. As the number of foundation building pills became less and less, the price became higher and higher. The 8th pill was even auctioned off for the astronomical price of 28 million. That was more than double the price of the 1st pill. This caused that elite of spiritual ocean tier from the Li clan to delightedly laugh for quite some time. Though the price of 13 million caused him to feel heartache earlier on, when compared with the current price, he was naturally happy to have bought it for only that much. There was only one pill left. Without a doubt, the final bid of this last foundation building pill would definitely break through the price of 30 million. Gods know when there would be new foundation building pills again. 20 million. True enough, the base price of 5 million had just been announced when someone immediately placed the high bid of 20 million. It was natural that the last pill would be worth more than 20 million, so what was the point of wasting their time making small bids of less than 20 million? Ling Han could not help but clap his hands, and said, "I like that kind of person, very straightforward." Lu Yutong and Li Si-chan both covered their mouths and laughed lightly. Who would not like someone who would be delivering money to him? Meanwhile, the eldest imperial prince was slightly confused. He thought that Ling Han himself was a straightforward person and so admired that kind of person as well, and could not help but ask himself honestly if he were a straightforward person. If he was not, would it be very difficult for him to befriend Ling Han then? 25 million. There was quite a number of people with straightforward characters. Another immediately added another 5 million to the bid. 26 million. 27 million. 28 million. 29 million. It was as if the price of 30 million was a new level. After the last bid was shouted out, a silence fell on the crowd. For the moment, none made another bid. The publicly acknowledged price of the foundation building pill was at around 10 million, but because there was no shortage of buyers and no one actually willing to sell it, the astronomical price of over 20 million naturally came about. However, no one's money came falling down from the skies, so they naturally could not simply spend excessively. Moreover, aside from alchemists, who could actually produce a massive amount of over 10 million? Such an amount would definitely have been the collective savings of a party, so how could it be spent so thoughtlessly? The majority of time of martial artists was spent on cultivation, so where would they have the time to earn money? For example, in the Ling clan, there was a few hundred people working in businesses and earning money to support the few dozens of people in the clan who could ascend up the path of martial arts and would thus be able to protect the wealth of the Ling clan. It was precisely because they were spending the money of their clans or parties that it was unavoidable that they would hesitate, considering carefully whether or not they should spend such an astronomical sum. 30 million. Finally, someone broke the silence. It was an elite of spiritual ocean tier from a middle-class clan. For the 8 great clans, one more spiritual pedestal tier elite would equate to an additional source of peak military power, and was very significant. However, it was not to the extent that there would be any real solid change to their power base. However, for a middle-class clan, if there was a spiritual pedestal tier elite in their ranks, that would definitely mean a complete transformation, and allow the clan to be on a completely different level than previously. Thus, middle-class clans were more desperate to get the foundation building pill, and were also ready to go to crazier lengths for it. 41 million. 42 million. 43 million. Finally, only 3 clans were left. The eyes of the representatives from these clans were all red and they completely looked like they were ready to throw everything away and spare no expenses just to get their hands on the final foundation building pill. Even after swallowing the foundation building pill, you would only have about 10 to 20% chance to break through. Why do the two of you have to compete so ferociously with me? One of them asked. Then, why won't Brother Ma allow me to have this chance? Another asked. This is a foundation building pill worth 13 stars. It's not just a 10 to 20% chance, but is close to 30%. The third person humphed coldly. If you can't afford to make a bid, then don't embarrass yourself. Then let's continue. Finally, the price was fixed at 49 million. Everyone had already guessed that the last foundation building pill would definitely get the highest price, but the price that almost reached 50 million still caused everyone to be dumbstruck. That was how an auction was like. There was no need for too many rich people as long as there were at least 2 parties willing to place bids, that would be enough. Just like how Ling Han and Qin Yunxiang placed competing bids for the Swift Cloud talismans, when it caused the price to soar all the way up to 40 million. It was only the fact that Qin Yunxiang was not able to produce so much cash that the earlier bidding was rendered void. Ling Han calculated for a moment, and could not help but feel a slight shock himself, because the 9 foundation building pills altogether were auctioned off for a price of 225 million. Even after the service charge of 14% was deducted, that would also be almost double the price of directly selling off one pill for 10 million. Lu Yutong and Li Si-chan also calculated it and were shocked as well. Such an astronomical number was enough to compare to the annual total income of a great clan. Total income, not total profit. In other words, Ling Han had earned more than the accumulated earnings of a great clan for 1 year in this single day. Alchemists really earn too much money. But that would depend on the person as well. Aside from Ling Han, what other alchemist could concoct these 9 foundation building pills without having exploded a few dozen furnaces first? And if it was an earth-grade alchemist, did an earth-grade alchemist still need such an earthly item like money? If an earth-grade alchemist actually concocted an earth-grade middle-level or even high-level treasured pill, then even selling off the whole Rain country would not be enough. The auction this time round ended smoothly, and Ling Han went to the backstage to settle his bill. The eldest imperial prince naturally thought he had gone to pay the money for his 3 swift cloud talismans, and would have never imagined that Ling Han had gone to receive his money. Moreover, the sum that he was receiving was enough to cause even an imperial prince like him to stop breathing. Young Master Han, the 9 foundation building pills have been auctioned off for a total of 225 million, and subtracting the 14% service charge, as well as the 10 million that you have withdrawn in advance earlier on, there is still 183,500,000 left. Jia Boyun handed over a stack of monetary notes to Ling Han. So much money naturally could not possibly be paid in gold. He already knew that Ling Han was about to become a black-grade high-level alchemist, and could even possibly step into earth-grade, and so he used a respectful address for him, hoping that Ling Han could concoct an earth-grade pill that could help a spiritual pedestal tier elite to break through. Otherwise, with his status, there was no need for him to be so respectful to this extent. Ling Han smiled and received the money from him. He did not even spare it a second look and simply put it away. He knew that the other would not dare to embezzle his money. Chapter 189, Contemplating the 10th Nucleus. As the auction ended, everyone naturally returned home. Those who had managed to buy items they liked were naturally happy, while those who had not went home sighing and shaking their heads. Ling Han, meanwhile, was the biggest winner of today, having received a massive wealth of close to 200 million. If this news was actually spread out, then there may actually be people who attempted to rob him on his way back. If they actually managed to succeed, there would be no need to worry about money for the rest of their lives. Thankfully, there did not appear any such blind people. When he returned to Huyang Academy, Ling Han went to bed. There was not much difference between 100 or 200 million and scrap paper in his eyes, so there was no need for him to keep counting his money like some kind of miser. Early the next morning, he naturally woke up to cultivate as per usual. His advancement rate was too fast by now. He had just broken through to the 9th layer of element gathering tier 2 days ago, yet now he was already close to the late period of the 9th layer. There was only one more step left and he would be in the peak period, ready to attempt breaking through to Gushing Spring tier. Should I try out that? Ling Han pondered, after he was done cultivating. In his last life, he had ventured into a considerable number of historical sites, and had naturally managed to obtain quite a number of cultivation and martial arts techniques, as well as a few personal letters that he suspected had been written by an elite of Shattering Void tier. There was a certain possibility mentioned in these letters. 10th layer of element gathering tier. 9 was the utmost number of this world, so 9 was considered the top of everything in this world. The king of yesterday and tomorrow referred to the emperors of the mortal world. It was the same in the field of martial arts, whether it was from body refining tier or all the way to heaven tier, the 9th layer was considered the top level that one could aspire to. And from body refining to heaven tier, there were also actually 9 tiers. The last Shattering Void tier would break one's mortal shackles, and was the step that would allow one to shatter the void to become a god. It was a bridge that connected to the other shore, and could be considered as the evasive one. However, there was an ancient almighty character that had mentioned that, in fact, one could actually still cultivate to the extreme layer in every tier, until perfection. The notes that Ling Han had obtained only mentioned that it was possible to form the 10th origin nucleus in element gathering tier, break the limit of 9 and catch the evasive one and really obtain perfection. The benefits of such a thing were endless. One had to understand that after element gathering tier, what lay ahead was gushing spring tier, and in this tier, the martial artist would transform the origin nuclei he had into springs that gushed out origin power in his dantian. After gushing spring tier was spiritual ocean tier, which was to transform these springs into endless oceans of origin power. Spiritual pedestal, flower blossoming, spiritual infant, deity transformation, all the subsequent tiers were closely related to this. From this aspect, the element gathering tier was actually the foundation of one's path of martial arts, and had far-reaching consequences. Body refining tier was only to refine one's blood and flesh, bones and tendons, while only in element gathering would one open up his dantian, and could finally be considered as having officially stepped onto the path of a cultivator. As a result, to be able to reach the ultimate limits of a mortal body in element gathering tier and reach perfection would have benefits that would last for the rest of one's lifetime. The problem here was that ancient almighty person had only mentioned that it was theoretically possible, but had not managed to accomplish it himself. It was because he had returned to consider this issue only after he had reached a very high cultivation level. However, time was irreversible, so he could not possibly return to element gathering tier to once again begin cultivating. There was a large lapse in the history of the martial arts of this land, and there was also a large number of alchemical pill formulae that had been lost in the passage of time. It was likely that some unknown massive catastrophe happened in the era of that almighty person. Anyways, his theory had never been spread out and known by others, not to mention attempted. It was thus lost in the pages of history until the notes came to be discovered by Ling Han. For the Ling Han of that time, these notes naturally did not have much use. However, who would have thought that his body would have been shattered by the Black Tower, and his soul, after 10,000 years, would be reborn in the body of a young man, which gave him an opportunity to start again from the beginning? It seems like, in a mysterious way, this was destined. Ling Han pinched his chin, obviously a bit hesitant. Forming the 10th nucleus was nothing to play around with. 9 was the ultimate limit, and was an absolute balance. However, if he decided to push in by force the 10th nucleus, that would undoubtedly shatter this delicate balance, and could possibly lead to a terrible disaster. Otherwise, after so many generations of elites and geniuses, why had no one ever thought of the possibility of 10 nuclei, or even 20? This naturally showed how difficult it was to actually take this step, or perhaps even how impossible a feat it seemed. Forget it, I'll reach the peak period of the 9th layer, then consider it again. Ling Han shook his head, and did not continue to waste his time pondering this issue. By afternoon, he received a piece of good news and a piece of bad news. The good news was that Mo Gao had come out of seclusion, and had successfully ascended to gushing spring tier. Teacher Mo, congratulations for breaking through. Ling Han sensed a powerful wave of origin power and immediately rushed over to Mo Gao's courtyard. True enough, he very quickly saw Mo Gao walk out of his house. Though he looked a little disheveled, his essence, energy, and spirit were shockingly strong. Ha ha ha, after 10+ years of delay, I finally broke through, Mo Gao said a bit ruefully. I believe that, with Teacher Mo's intent focus on the art of the sword, you will be able to easily break through the obstacles on your path of martial arts and enter into an even higher cultivation level, Ling Han said, smiling. This was not an exaggeration on his part. With a sword heart that was almost formed, Mo Gao's path of cultivation would definitely be smooth and easy from this point onwards. As the saying goes, a great talent matures slowly, and Mo Gao would definitely experience a huge burst. Mo Gao smiled faintly. As a martial artist, how could he not desire to ascend to a higher cultivation level? It was just that when compared with advancement in cultivation level, he was more passionate about the art of the sword. Now that his sword heart was forming, and his cultivation level was also raised, he had nothing to be displeased about. Your cultivation. Mo Gao's expression suddenly changed and he pointed at Ling Han, shock filling his features. 9th layer of element gathering tier. He suddenly had a feeling like he was about to faint. When Ling Han had just come here, he was only in the 5th layer of element gathering, and just how much time had passed? Just barely a month, and this guy was already in the 9th layer of element gathering now. Most likely, it would not be too long before Ling Han would be able to catch up to and even surpass him. What a monster! Ling Han nodded, and said, the advancement in cultivation level is indeed a bit slow. He sighed. Poser. Even with his training in sword heart, Mo Gao could not help but want to curse. This brat was really too much of a poser. Get lost, he said irritatedly. Ling Han laughed loudly and left. Mo Gao had just broken through, so he needed some time to stabilize his position in the cultivation level. The bad news, meanwhile, was brought by Lu Yutong. Actually, this piece of news was expected, though it had come a bit later than he had predicted. Those clothing shops that Ling Han had opened had all been robbed or damaged the night before. Now, the doors were broken open, the clothes were either robbed or torn to pieces. Not one of them was in a state to reopen. Obviously, this was the beginning of the counterattack by Chen Yunxiang, or perhaps Sun Ziyan. Since the peaceful resolution had failed the day before, they had immediately started to act the night before. Most probably, they had used the power of the earth and water faction. After all, it was very easy for those hooligans to do this kind of job. Now what do we do? Lu Yutong asked Ling Han. Since the opponent is not willing to follow the rules, then we can also only resort to force. Ling Han smiled faintly. Lu Yutong was stunned, and said, you want to charge to the Chen clan? You can't. Sun Ziyan must have guessed that you would do so. The Chen clan would definitely be heavily guarded today, and there may even be Imperial Guards present. If you actually come to blows with the Imperial Guards, no one would be able to save you. The Imperial Guards represented the Imperial family, so there was no difference between coming to blows with the Imperial Guards and committing treason. Ling Han grinned, then said, since that grandson wants to play, then let's just join him in his game. Anyways, I'm quite free right now. Let's go to the Earth and Water faction first, and first deal with this group of lackeys. Lu Yutong was even dizzier at this, and said, the faction leader of the Earth and Water faction, Yang Tiandu, is in the spiritual ocean tier. So we have to go to the Heaven Military Hall first, Ling Han said with a smile. Chapter 190, Force Sale. There were many lone cultivators in Rain Country, and they did not have any party behind them to support them. However, cultivation was a very expensive venture, so then, where did they get their money from? Naturally, through working for others. For example, they may choose to serve as guards for traveling merchants or collect bounties after killing some villainous characters or gather ingredients that their employer required. As time passed, there was a place and organization that was specifically formed for lone cultivators to get missions, and that was the Heaven Military Hall. Anyone could enter the Heaven Military Hall. One only had to register his personal information, and would be then able to obtain missions and begin his way to earn money. Of course, the Heaven Military Hall was even more welcoming of the wealthy to post missions here. It was a bit like the auctioneer's house. After a mission had been completed, the Heaven Military Hall would collect a portion of the rewards as fee for their service. Lone cultivators, as their name suggested, usually moved alone and were thus like a sheet of loose sand. However, if they actually managed to cooperate with each other, they would become a party that should not be taken lightly. Thus, in the process of the formation of the Heaven Military Hall, there was also involvement of the imperial family. They were not only able to take a share of the profits, they also sent out a large amount of manpower as surveillance to avoid someone secretly gathering these lone cultivators together to become a force that could threaten the authority of the imperial family over the country. Thus, the Heaven Military Hall has become more and more official, and there was an increasing government-approved quality about the place. However, there were still some things that were not appropriate to be registered on the records. There were some who would be receiving their mission requests in the underground, but that would mean there was no security provided. It was possible that the employer may not pay for the completed mission, or it could also be possible that even after completing the mission, there was no money received. One could only bear the risks on his own. There was only one rule in Heaven Military Hall: everything could be done if there was enough money. Ling Han went to the bank first to cash in his monetary notes, then headed towards the eastern part of the imperial city. That was where the Heaven Military Hall was located. Lu Yutong followed at Ling Han's heels, a worried frown over her face. Though the Earth and Water faction had a bad name, as if they were detested gutter rats, the faction leader was an authentic spiritual ocean tier elite. If one wanted to oppose this kind of powerful character, there was definitely a need to at least get the help of one elite of spiritual ocean tier, or perhaps even a few. Once one managed to reach the high level of spiritual ocean tier, would a martial artist still need to be a mercenary? He could simply join a powerful party and take the position of an elder and would only need to cultivate every day. It was even fine if he decided to laze around and not cultivate. He only needed to step out and take action occasionally whenever he was needed. And what was the point of hiring a few hundred gushing spring-tier martial artists? Against an opponent in a high layer of spiritual ocean tier, they would only be mowed over in a single move. Hu Niu, meanwhile, was completely carefree, running all over the place, playing and laughing. "Damn girl, where's your guardian?" An angered voice was heard, attracting Ling Han's attention. The voice belonged to a sturdy man who had a street-side stall, and who was currently shouting angrily at Hu Niu. Apparently, Hu Niu had bumped into some of his merchandise, but that was also because he himself had taken up too much space, and had placed his merchandise all the way onto the street, making it unavoidable for those who wanted to pass to actually have to circle around his stall. The little girl, due to a moment of inattention, bumped into a few of his items. Hu Niu was naturally not easily bullied. She bared her teeth and glared back at the sturdy man, her ferocious nature on full display. Ling Han walked over, rubbed Hu Niu's head, and asked, "What is it?" "Your little girl made my things fall over, so you must pay the compensation," the sturdy man said, his stare fixed on Ling Han. While he spoke, 4 similarly tough-looking men stepped out behind him. They all crossed their arms in front of their chests, smirking coldly. Ling Han understood now. That man must have deliberately arranged his merchandise in such a way that they would cover a large part of the street. Once anyone accidentally bumped into his merchandise, he would take advantage of the opportunity and jump out immediately to ask for compensation. The other 4 men were naturally his accomplices, and were there to add pressure to his threats. Ling Han's eyes swept over the merchandise that the man had laid out. They were all counterfeit items. Some of what looked to be ginseng was actually mere carrots that had been joined with the top of a ginseng root. Some gold items were worthless, as their insides were filled with brass, and the joint was very obvious, so how could they possibly deceive his eyes? He was just about to give these 5 people a little lesson when his eyes were attracted by a strangely shaped rock, and he could not help but ask, "What is the price of this rock?" The stall keeper was about to fly into a rage, but when he saw that Ling Han seemed interested in buying one of his merchandise, he could not help but smile, and answered, "I'll give you a cheaper price, 1,000 silver coins." 1,000 silver coins? He's gone crazy from wanting money, hasn't he? That's right. That's just a piece of worthless scrap. Even if it was an excellent rainflower stone, or a heaven song stone, that kind of size would only be worth about 100+ silver coins. Hush, they're from the Earth and Water faction. You mustn't enrage them. They're always here bullying the locals, and no one will actually step out to handle them. There were some passers-by who could no longer stand by and watch and immediately spoke out in rebuke, but there were others who revealed the identities of the 5 hooligans and advised them to watch what they said. Fuck, if you guys dare speak any more nonsense, I'll chop you all to death. The stall keeper glared and showed off a fierce expression. The 4 men behind him all smirked coldly. Those who had spoken up in rebuke shivered, and indeed, they did not dare to speak any longer. Brother, this is an exquisite spirit stone. Just look at how bizarrely shaped it is. It is an odd item that has been naturally formed in this way, the stall keeper boasted. I don't like it. Ling Han shook his head. After he found out that these people were from the Earth and Water faction, he had the impulse to play a terrible joke on them. Don't like it? The stall keeper laughed coldly. If you don't like it, then why had you asked about it? Are you trying to play around with me? It's too late now. Whether you like it or not, you'll have to buy it now. What a bully. How can he force a sale like this? Who asked them to be from the Earth and Water faction? In the past, someone had previously reported the crime, but when the Imperial Guards came, it was completely useless. Instead, the Imperial Guards chatted and joked around with them. At the side, there were some who had began exclaiming in rebuke about the injustice, but there were some experienced locals who revealed the truth of the matter helplessly. These local ruffians were completely secure, knowing that they had backing. Ling Han pretended to be scared, and asked, I'm not buying, are you going to beat me up then? Hung, this little girl pushed over a few of my items, and you wasted my time. If you buy this rock, then we'll forget all about the matter. Otherwise, hee. The stall keeper gave a signal, and the 4 men behind him simultaneously pulled out a dagger each and began to play with it. The threat was more than obvious. Don't be hasty. Ling Han waved his hands hurriedly and said, I'll buy it, then. Good. The stall keeper smiled coldly. When he saw Ling Han behaving so weakly and so easily bullied, his greed could not help but swell, and he said, the price has risen now, it's 2,000 silver coins. He glared fiercely at Ling Han, and asked, what is it? You don't want to pay? Here, Ling Han said as he handed over 2 monetary notes, each worth 1,000 silver coins. Ha ha ha. The stall keeper laughed pompously. This brat had to be a fool from some rich family, he actually handed over the money so obediently. Is this rock mine, now? Ling Han asked, smiling. It's yours. It's yours, the stall keeper waved him off. He had discovered this rock in his backyard a few days ago. Because it was very weirdly shaped, and had a bit of ornamental value, he had taken it out to sell it. His initial motive was naturally to deceive some fool into buying it off him, but he never thought that he would actually be able to sell it off for 2,000 silver coins. Lu Yutong watched the entire scene and could not help but feel secretly confused. With Ling Han's ability, handling these 5 local ruffians was naturally as easy as a piece of cake, but why had he deliberately allowed himself to be fooled? Ling Han laughed and gave a light tap on the rock. With the force of his origin power, there instantly appeared a few cracks on the surface of the rock. He lightly broke the pieces apart, and as the crushed pieces of rock fell, there actually appeared a flicker of gold light from within. Everyone could not help but turn to look. Chapter 191, The Golden Flower of the Stone. Ling Han broke the rock apart in a few moves, and the golden light became stronger and stronger, before finally becoming a ball of resplendent light, so bright that it was not possible to open one's eyes to look at it. But the golden light very quickly paled and darkened, and in Ling Han's hand, there shockingly appeared a golden plant. It looked like a chrysanthemum, the whole flower was sparkling and translucent, possessing an indescribable beauty to it. Ah! Oh! Everyone was exclaiming in shock. There was actually such a strange object growing inside a rock. No matter what it was really inconceivable. "Return this flower to me," the stall keeper instantly shouted, his eyes red. Even if he had no idea what it was, he would have been able to guess that a plant growing within a rock was definitely an extraordinary treasure and not something that can be bought with a mere 2,000 silver coins. He had finally understood by now. Ling Han had only pretended to be scared previously, but in fact, he had already had his eye fixed on this rock. This detestable brat. Ling Han only pretended he had not heard anything, and asked Hunyo, "Nyo, do you know what this is?" Hunyo sniffed it a few times, and instantly, put on a disinterested expression, and said, "It's not delicious." Ling Han laughed loudly, and said, "This is called the golden flower of the stone. It is formed through gathering spiritual qi from its surroundings and can only grow within this kind of stone of 9 poisons. It has the effect of curing poison. Only a tiny little petal would be enough to cure many of the poisons of this world. The stem is even more outstanding, as it can cure any poison. Brother, this golden flower of the stone is probably worth a lot, right?" one of the spectators asked. "Of course." Ling Han nodded. It is unavoidable for martial artists to enter into areas that are filled with powerful poison to adventure, and merely placing a single petal of the golden flower of the stone in one's mouth would allow one to resist many poisons. "Tell me, how much do you think it's worth?" "A petal is worth 10,000 silver coins," someone asked, his voice shaking. 10,000 coins? Ling Han shook his head with a smile, and said, "The rewards would naturally be overwhelmingly large if one actually had to enter such a dangerous location on an adventure. It would be nothing strange to spend several million, or even several dozen million just to prepare for such a journey. As a result, a single petal of this flower would be worth 100,000 coins, at the very least." There was a simultaneous sharp intake of breath from all around them. A price of at least 100,000 coins, that was really too terrifying, because this golden flower of the stone had exactly how many petals? At the very least, there were a few hundred petals there, then that would be worth about a few dozen million. Moreover, the stem could apparently cure any conceivable poison, so it was naturally worth even more money. "Ha ha ha, brat, give me back my golden flower of the stone." The stall keeper was also listening to Ling Han's explanation just now, and now that he knew the astronomical value of this golden flower, he was both shocked and delighted. He was secretly laughing at Ling Han for being an idiot, to actually reveal the existence of such a treasure in the public, and was also secretly delighted inside his heart. He was really going to make a huge amount of money this time round. "Is there something wrong with you?" Ling Han smiled calmly. "This is already mine, so what does it have to do with you? This is your money, I'm giving it back." The stall keeper threw out 2 monetary notes. "Now, give back my golden flower of the stone. The transaction has been completed, so this item is naturally mine. And I have no intention to sell it off to you," Ling Han said seriously. Who would dare not to sell me something that I, Wuxia, want?" The stall keeper smirked, and stretched out a hand towards Ling Han's neck. Hunyo moved. One smack from her, and with a pung, Wuxia was instantly flung away, crashing heavily into a wall before slowly sliding down it. He had actually been smacked unconscious. Everyone was astonished. How could a little girl who was only about 5 to 6 years old have such powerful strength? Ling Han grabbed a piece of cloth and wrapped the golden flower of the stone in it. In such a public area, he dared not reveal the secret of the spatial ring. He turned to look at the other 4 ruffians, and asked with a smile, "Are you guys planning to snatch my stuff, too?" The 4 men hurriedly shook their heads, a layer of cold sweat collecting on their foreheads. Wuxia was the strongest of the 5 of them. He was in the 8th layer of body refining tier, and was actually smacked unconscious so easily by a little snip of a girl, so it was predictable that this young man would be even more remarkable. He was definitely playing the pig to eat the tiger just now, definitely pretending to be harmless previously to fool them. Just now, this guy deliberately showed his fear, and was only trying to toy around with them. Now, they had, with their own hands, sold off a priceless treasure for the cheap price of 2,000 coins. Whenever they recalled this in the future, they would definitely grieve and lament, with an increasing urge to commit suicide. To them, this was the heaviest kind of punishment. No wonder this brat revealed the golden flower of the stone in public, he was trying to provoke them. Damn him! Ling Han held onto Hu Niu's hand and left proudly. Lu Yutong smiled, because she knew that Ling Han must have noticed something about the rock to put on such an act. The 2 adults and 1 child left very quickly, leaving behind the envious and impressed gazes of the crowd. Big brother Shizhong. The 4 ruffians hurriedly went to help Ruan Shizhong up. After pinching his renjong and pouring cold water on him, they finally managed to pull Ruan Shizhong back to consciousness. Ah! Ruan Shizhong shouted loudly. My treasure! He suddenly jumped up from the ground, and realized that there were people looking at him from all around, wearing expressions that showed they were enjoying his misfortune. He could not help but flush brightly at this, both humiliated and enraged. Big brother Shizhong, what do we do now? The 4 ruffians asked. Ruan Shizhong thought for a moment, then said, 2 of you follow that brat and see where he's going. The other 2 of you will come back with me and ask Hall Leader AI to step out and snatch back the treasure. But, Big brother Shizhong, if we ask for Hall Leader AI's help, the bigger share will definitely have to go to him, one of the ruffians said cautiously. Pa, Ruan Shizhong gave him a slap and rebuked him, are you an idiot? If we don't get Hall Leader AI to deal with that brat, we won't get anything at all. If Hall Leader AI manages to snatch back the treasure, then we'd at least get something. Right, right, right. Big brother Shizhong is indeed clever. The 4 ruffians nodded in agreement. Then let's go. Ruan Shizhong glared at them. What about the things here? One of the ruffians pointed at the items still laid out in the stall. They're not worth much anyways. Moreover, who would dare to steal my stuff? The 5 of them immediately went off on their respective missions. 2 followed behind Ling Han, while the other 3 went off to get help. How could they bear to simply let the matter go when it involved a treasure that was worth a few dozen million? Young Master Han, there's someone following us, Lu Yutong said suddenly. Just let them follow. When there's enough of them later, I'll deal with them in one go, Ling Han said, smiling. Niu wants to beat up 10. Hu Niu said excitedly. The little girl had grown up by the side of a ferocious beast, and her wild nature was very dominant, a part of her personality. She was especially fond of violence. All right. Ling Han laughed. There was an extremely weird spirit base in the body of this little girl. In the future, even the whole world could possibly tremble because of her, what more just to beat up 10 people. Lu Yutong could not help but roll her eyes. Ling Han actually taught Hu Niu like this. Wasn't he just egging her on to do whatever she liked? As they walked, they soon arrived at the Heaven Military Hall. This was indeed a lively place. There was a great hall that was a dazzling sight, while a square-shaped plaza surrounded it on all sides. There was a large number of people on this plaza, and there were even some who were holding on to signs for recruitment, in order to form a group to complete a mission. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, let's hold up signs for recruitment as well. They never imagined that buying a sign here would be so expensive. The seller actually quoted a price of 10 silver coins. Ling Han did not mind, but Lu Yutong could not bear wasting money so pointlessly and glared furiously at the seller for quite a while. Ling Han began to write on the sign in his good penmanship. Then he tied it in a fixed position on a rock. Instantly, he became the focus of everyone's attention. Chapter 192, Going to the Earth and Water Faction for a Walk. That was because the words written on the sign that Ling Han had put up were indeed a bit shocking. Recruiting people to go to the Earth and Water Faction for a fight. Rewards are as follows: Gushing Spring Tier, 10,000 silver coins per day, Spiritual Ocean Tier, 100,000 silver coins per day, Element Gathering Tier need not apply. Go to the Earth and Water Faction for a fight? What kind of a place was the Earth and Water Faction? It had a Spiritual Ocean Tier elite to oversee things, and was at the same level as a middle-class clan. Going there to fight, then that would mean having to stand against a Spiritual Ocean Tier elite. There were only so many Spiritual Pedestal Tier elites in Rain Country, and underneath Spiritual Pedestal Tier, the strongest would be Spiritual Ocean Tier. Who would dare go to make trouble? However, on the other hand, the rewards that Ling Han promised were indeed enough of a shock themselves. A Gushing Spring Tier martial artist would be able to earn 10,000 in one day, while a Spiritual Ocean Tier martial artist could earn 100,000 per day. Earning 100,000 per day, that would mean earning 3 million in a single month. What kind of unbelievable concept was that? Even if it was a great clan like one of the 8 great clans, their net monthly income would not exceed 10 million. And now a single person would be able to earn 3 million. That was comparable to 1/3 of the monthly income of a great clan. How shocking was that? Moreover, the 8 great clans were only able to earn so much profit because they had Spiritual Pedestal Tier elites in their ranks, and now 3 Spiritual Ocean Tier martial artists would be able to earn about the same amount. All of a sudden, this attracted the attention of a lot of people, but all of them were merely watching. None actually approached to get the exact details of the mission. After all, Ling Han was really much too young. Who would believe that he would be able to produce such a massive sum of money? Moreover, the Earth and Water Faction was nothing to play around with. Thus, everyone merely chose to stand by and watch at this point in time. You can't simply set up a sign here. If the contract has not obtained the acknowledgement and guarantee of the Heaven Military Hall, everyone will not believe that you really have such wealth, Lu Yutong reminded. All right, then. Let's go inside then. Ling Han strode towards the Heaven Military Hall. He came to a free window, and said, I would like to post a mission. Young master, what mission would you like to post? The young girl who was in charge of registering missions asked. She was quite a pretty girl. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, going to the Earth and Water Faction for a fight. The young girl's pretty face twitched uncontrollably. She was naturally aware of what kind of place the Earth and Water Faction was. She shook her head quickly, and said, Young master, don't joke around. The Earth and Water Faction is a party of the Imperial City. Putting aside whether you have such ability, young master, even if you do have, the Imperial Guards will still stop you from going there to make trouble. The Heaven Military Hall will not accept such a request. Then, how about this? Ling Han thought for a moment, then said, change it to going to the Earth and Water Faction for a walk, recruiting people to protect me. For a walk. The young girl's mouth once again twitched. Who would simply allow intruders to enter into their home to take a walk? There's no problem with this kind of request, right? Ling Han asked, smiling. On the surface, there was naturally no issue with going for a walk, but anyone would know that this going for a walk was actually going for a fight. The young girl grimaced, then said, there is indeed no problem, but, young master. If there's no problem, then hang up the mission for me. You do not have to bother about any other things. Ling Han smiled, handed over some monetary notes, and said, the rewards are as follows. He recited the rewards list, then added, 10 Spiritual Ocean Tier martial artists would be enough, and Gushing Spring Tier, 100 should be good enough. The expression of the pretty young girl immediately changed. What a humongous expense was this? Her first reaction was that Ling Han must be joking, but there was nothing false about the monetary notes that he had handed over. The total amount was 6 million. It was enough to hire such a group for up to 3 days. This young master was an extremely rich young man. She hurriedly registered Ling Han's request. Anyways, as long as there was no breach of the Heaven Military Hall's rules and the rewards were paid, then however weird or bizarre a request it would be announced to all the members of the Heaven Military Hall. Because the reward for this request was so colossal, it instantly became the focus of attention. What? Hiring bodyguards to go for a walk at the Earth and Water faction? Is this some kind of joke? Don't care whether it's a joke or not. Now that it is posted, then that means that there is absolutely no problem with the validity of the reward. Hiss, a day equals 10,000. If you're in Spiritual Ocean tier, you can even earn 100,000. The whole plaza became lively. Some of them recalled the signboard that Ling Han had put up previously, and they went over to find him. Ling Han was already standing there, and those people immediately began inquiring him about the details of the request. Young master, I am in the 9th layer of Element Gathering tier, and have 1 foot into Gushing Spring tier. How about it? I only want 5,000 silver coins. I am in the 8th layer of Element Gathering tier, and I only require 4,000 coins. Those inquiring were mostly all in Element Gathering tier, and were only there to join in on the excitement. Meanwhile, those Spiritual Ocean tier elites were merely observing. After all, the Earth and Water faction was not something to joke about. Ling Han merely pointed at the sign that he had put up. What did he need Element Gathering tier martial artists for? He himself was in the 9th layer of Element Gathering tier, and gathering a bunch of lackeys at this level was not impressive enough. His eyes swept over the surroundings, when a smile suddenly appeared on his face. He walked forwards, where a middle-aged man was sitting on a stone lion. There was a wine gourd in his hand, and he kept pouring wine into his mouth endlessly. This brat has quite good eyes, to actually fix his eye on Master Guang Yuan. What, the Master Guang Yuan who is known to be able to shatter a mountain with 7 punches? That's right. He's one of the top 10 strongest warriors of our Heaven Military Hall. His cultivation level is the 5th layer of Spiritual Ocean tier. In the past, he was also considered as a genius of martial arts, but for some unknown reason, has been stagnating on the 5th layer of Spiritual Ocean tier for such a long time. Are you an idiot? Every step in Spiritual Ocean tier is as difficult as climbing to heaven. It is not uncommon for some to be stuck for their whole life in this tier. When they saw that middle-aged man, everyone exclaimed in shock. Ling Han naturally did not know that this large man's name was Guang Yuan. He had only noticed the latter's cultivation level, and so had decided to approach him. However, as his attention became more focused, he found out even more information, and he could not help but smile. The more you drink to forget your troubles, the more troubled you will feel, he said to Guang Yuan. What does a little brat know about troubles? Guang Yuan asked calmly, not even turning around to look at Ling Han. You're cultivating the large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll, right? Ling Han lowered his voice considerably, only loud enough for just Guang Yuan to hear. Guang Yuan's expression changed drastically, and he could not help but stop his actions of continuing to drink. He looked towards Ling Han, and similarly lowered his voice to a whisper, and asked, How did you know? I not only know that you're cultivating the large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll, I also know that you have made some mistake in your cultivation. At present, isn't the third bone on your spine faintly aching? Ling Han asked calmly. This time, Guang Yuan could no longer maintain his composure. He suddenly leaped up from the stone lion, stood in front of Ling Han, and asked, Who are you? It was only in this year that he had discovered there was a problem in his cultivation, and the symptoms were exactly like what Ling Han had pointed out, the third bone of his spine would faintly ache. Come. Accept my request, and I will give you a very fortunate opportunity. It will not only solve your current problem, you may even be able to advance further, Ling Han said, smiling faintly, like a demon bewitching a human. It was only now that Guang Yuan saw the sign that Ling Han had put up, he could not help but wear a strange expression, and said, "You have quite a bold personality. Not too bad. That's why I'm looking for a few bodyguards." Ling Han said, smiling. A thoughtful expression appeared on Guang Yuan's face. Since Ling Han could tell that he was cultivating the large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll, and could also tell that he had encountered a problem in his cultivation, then that would imply that there was a very high chance that Ling Han could solve his problem. He decided to take the gamble. All right then. I'll accept this request. Chapter 193, Successfully Gathering a Group. Guang Yuan had not purposely lowered his voice when he said this, so those around them heard his words very clearly. What? Shatter a mountain with 7 punches, Master Guang Yuan, has accepted the request. That's Master Guang Yuan we're talking about here. With Master Guang Yuan there, what's there to be afraid of? I'm applying too. When they saw that Guang Yuan had accepted the request, a considerable number of Gushing Spring tier elites too exclaimed, expressing their interest. Please go to the main hall to obtain the mission, Ling Han said, smiling. Then, come back here to gather. Is today considered one day as well? They all thought that this was inconceivable. Of course, Ling Han said casually. This brat definitely had to have enough money to burn. It was almost noon by now, which meant that half the day's money had already been burnt. However, such a rich employer would be favored by everyone, wouldn't he? With the participation of a spiritual ocean tier elite, the rest were naturally feeling braver. Even if the sky fell down on them, there would be someone taller to hold it up. The power of setting an example was great, as very soon, there were other elites of spiritual ocean tier who decided to accept the request. In this manner, so what if they decided to barge into the earth and water faction? If Yang Tiandu did not want to participate in a conflict that would damage both sides equally, he would only be able to swallow his anger. The more spiritual ocean tier elites accepted the request, the more attractive this mission naturally became. Anyways, they only needed to keep Ling Han safe, and there was no need for them to flout the law in any way, so they would at least be able to retreat unscathed from this. After another hour had passed, the 100 Gushing Spring tier martial artists were successfully gathered. In fact, there were even more Gushing Spring tier martial artists who were interested in joining, but Ling Han did not need too many of them. However, there were only 7 spiritual ocean tier elites. After all, spiritual ocean tier elites could definitely be considered the absolutely elite powerful warriors. It was not an easy feat for a lone cultivator to make it this far. In fact, being able to recruit 7 of such powerful warriors in just over an hour's time was enough of a miraculous feat itself. Firstly, it was because the rewards that Ling Han had posted were attractive enough, and secondly, with the participation of Guang Yuan, he influenced those who were still wavering and hesitating to join. 7 spiritual ocean tier elites should be about enough. Ling Han considered for a moment. Though it was not as impressive as having 10 to back him, it was not too bad either. Young Master Han, when are we leaving? Those gathered asked Ling Han. Though they were all at a higher cultivation level than Ling Han, but who asked him to be their employer? Lone cultivators were not as proud as the clan members of prominent clans. Otherwise, they would definitely not be addressing Ling Han as young Master Han, unless they knew his background. When those who went to accept the mission return, we'll set out, Ling Han said. All right. Everyone nodded, practically able to see in their mind's eye a huge sum of money waving at them. That's him. It was at this moment that a man nearby pointed at Ling Han, his face filled with fury. It was Ruan Shizhong who had previously forced Ling Han to buy his merchandise and attempted to force him to sell it back. There were a few other people around him. 4 of them were his lackeys, and there was another middle-aged man, who had a much steadier aura about him. This man was a gushing spring tier elite. The middle-aged man's name was Ai Song, and he was one of the hall leaders of the Earth and Water faction. When he heard Ruan Shizhong tell him about the incident involving the golden flower of the stone, he instantly could not hold back his greed and followed them here. Brat, Ruan Shizhong of our faction mistakenly sold off a treasured item of our faction. Give us back the treasured item. Ai Song shouted at Ling Han, a haughty expression on his face. Those who had agreed to accept Ling Han's request immediately looked fierce at this. Their mission was to ensure Ling Han's safety. They never thought that the enemies would already appear, when they hadn't even stepped out of Heaven Military Hall. It was indeed quite intriguing. These lone cultivators were all living on the edge of danger. It could be claimed that they had managed to come this far on their path of cultivation all with their own power. Of course, there were a few who had done despicable acts before, such as robbery and murder. They were more rounded, tougher, and more warlike than those who had grown up under the protection of their respective clans. It was too bad that Ai Song did not have enough self-awareness and felt too secure in himself, so sure that he would be able to easily dominate such a youngster like Ling Han. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, "He sold it and I bought it, so the item is naturally mine. I don't have any interest to sell it off, so get lost." Get lost. Ai Song's previously haughty expression became extremely ugly, as if he had been suddenly punched, and he asked darkly, "Brat, do you know who I am?" "An idiot trying to give me a laugh," Ling Han said, smiling. What? Ai Song was stunned for a moment, before looking extremely enraged. Ling Han continued, "I realized that all idiots have a common characteristic, and that is they all like to ask, 'Do you know who I am?' or 'Are you aware of who I am?' How the fuck should I know what idiot you are? You're seeking death." Ai Song finally could no longer hold himself back. He gave a great leap and pounced towards Ling Han, delivering a punch. He wanted to severely injure this brat who had spoken such insolent words. "Get back, idiot!" A figure leaped out and similarly threw a punch towards Ai Song. Pang! The two men's fists collided against each other, instantly creating a visible ripple that spread out in all directions. Ai Song trembled, and Teng, retreated a whole 13 steps. The other person was also forced backwards, though he merely took 7 steps backwards. Ai Song could not help but reveal a resentful expression, and said, "What a good brat to actually dare to speak so insolently to me. So there is someone to back you. And who are you? Are you aware of who I am?" When he spoke the last words, he suddenly recalled what Ling Han had said just now, and could not help but look slightly embarrassed. "How do I know who you are, idiot?" The man shrugged. He was naturally one of the bodyguards that Ling Han had recruited. His name was Husan, and he was in the 4th layer of Gushing Spring Tier. Ha ha ha. The others began to laugh as well. Ai Song gave a humph, and said, "Don't think that you are powerful enough to dominate over me. I had just been a bit careless just now." This was the truth. He naturally could not beat Ling Han to death, so had used very little power in that punch just now. "I am Ai Song, the hall leader of the Loyalty Hall of Earth and Water faction. Do you still intend to stand against me?" he added. Everyone could not help but say, "Oh." No wonder he seemed to hold such a grudge against Ling Han, because Ling Han was indeed going to deal with the Earth and Water faction. They did not know that they had not guessed correctly at all. "Get lost." Husan glared. Though lone cultivators were very weak on their own, they still had one advantage, and that was the fact they had nothing to worry about. They did not have to worry about such things like if any conflict would rise up between their clan and their opponent's clan, because they had no clan. If they wanted to fight, they would. If they weren't strong enough to beat their opponent, they could flee. In the worst-case scenario, they could hide somewhere for a few years. Very good. To actually dare to go against our earth and water faction, how bold, AI Song said furiously. Ling Han walked towards Ruanshizhong, smiled, and said, "It just so happens that I don't know where the lair of the earth and water faction is. Let us there then." Insolence. AI Song once again acted, but Hu Sen once again punched out and blocked his attack. Ling Han stretched out a hand to grab him, and Ruanshizhong was easily subdued. He smiled faintly, and said, "I gave you a chance. It's too bad you did not cherish it, and came back to make trouble with me. You should know that there will not always be second chances available in life." Pa. His hands moved, and Ruanshizhong's right arm was instantly broken, hanging on at a terrifying angle. It was a sight that would make anyone shiver. Ah! Ruanshizhong instantly wailed in agony. This time, not just AI Song, even Guang Yuan and the others were extremely shocked, because it was not a small issue to cause injury to another in such a public area in the imperial city. This brat was really a bit too ruthless, wasn't he? Chapter 194, You Extort Me? Reverie _ Good. 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 You dare harm the people of Earth and Water faction, you're seeking your own death. AI Song smiled coldly, and turned to leave. He wasn't running, but he was going to find the Imperial Guards. A place like Heavenly Military Hall where there were many martial artists and lone martial artists who were ill-tempered and impulsive was one where a fight could break out just because of a single disagreement. So, there were Imperial Guards posted here to deter troublemakers and police the area. "Master Han, it's troublesome now," said someone pointing at Ruanshizhong. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "No matter." Guang Yuan and the others frowned and thought that Ling Han was too arrogant. Those who went against the imperial law never came to a good end. Just a short while later, AI Song led 2 Imperial Guards over. These 2 Imperial Guards were only at 9th element gathering tier, but as they approached, everyone made way. The people weren't scared of those 2, but of the uniforms on them that represented the Emperor's power and law. "These 2 sirs, this is the child publicly harming people at Heaven Military Temple," said AI Song pointing at Ling Han who was still in control of the whimpering Ruanshizhong. It was practically irrefutable evidence. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, "You can eat whatever you want, but you can't irresponsibly speak as you wish." This guy fell on his own, breaking even his arm. I kindly helped him up. I'll let it pass that I'm not even given a Good Samaritan award, but how could you extort me? This not only enraged AI Song, but also made Guang Yuan and the others speechless. This guy was too good at making stuff up, even going as far as making a bogus claim. "What really happened," said an Imperial Guard, who looked towards Ling Han with a hint of awe. This was really inconceivable that the law enforcement team belonging directly to the Emperor's family would revere a young man, but the truth was so. Ling Han knew that they recognized his identity. 2 great alchemy masters backed him, so how could they not know him considering the grasp of the Emperor's family? Thus, the Imperial Guards definitely received orders that as long as Ling Han didn't commit murder and arson, no amount of disturbance would matter. Contrarily, if Ling Han faced danger, these Imperial Guards would have to protect him, or they wouldn't be able to justify themselves to the 2 great alchemy masters. However, from this, it could be seen that Feng Yan had an even more terrifying background, because when Feng Yan slashed the cart on the streets, no Imperial Guards ran out and just let them stir up trouble all they wanted. 2 sirs, the situation is clear, this guy is the culprit. AI Song shouted. An Imperial Guard's expression turned solemn, and he said, "This young master said it well, words shouldn't be said irresponsibly. Do you have proof?" "Proof? Did this still need proof? It couldn't be more obvious, or were you too blind?" AI Song had a stomachful of rage, but with the thought of the status of these Imperial Guards, he could only calmly say, Ruanshizhong, you come tell these two sirs. Ruanshizhong endured the pain, and said, two sirs, it's him, he was the one who broke my arm. He was tricked by Ling Hang into giving the golden flower of the stone, slapped dizzy by Hunyo, and now his arm was broken by Ling Han. Naturally, he hated Ling Han and Ling Han's companions to the bones. Pa! Ling Han immediately slapped Ruanshizhong in the back of his head, and said coldly, you shameful thing. I kindly helped you up, yet you bite like a mad dog. Do I look easy to bully? Ruanshizhong almost fainted. He forcefully bought and sold, not counting how many evil deeds he'd done, but being unjustly treated was a first. He felt so aggrieved that his veins were going to explode. He did it. Ruanshizhong's 4 underlings all stood forward to testify. Lords Imperial Guards, we're all witnesses, surely we're not all trying to extort him, said Ai Song coldly. Oh, so you can make up facts with more witnesses? Ling Han laughed lightly, then turned to speak to the crowd. Did I break this man's arm? No. Guang Yuan and the others all said with a smile. The lone cultivators often have wild and intractable dispositions, some even wished for mayhem. Naturally, they all started to stir up a fuss. Ling Han shrugged, and said, these 2 Imperial Guard brothers, you both heard them. I have more witnesses that say I didn't break this guy's arm. Shameless. Ai Song's face twitched. Water and Earth faction could be said as the most infamous force within the Imperial City. As long as money could be made, all jobs were accepted no matter how dirty it was. But even Ai Song wanted to yell out, shameful. It was apparent how angry Ling Han made him. Boy, is it really wise for you to go against Earth and Water faction? He said threateningly. Dear Imperial Guard brothers, this guy is threatening me, you all heard, right? If anything happens to me from today on, just look for him, said Ling Han quickly. The 2 Imperial Guards immediately looked towards Ai Song, and one of them said, Sir Ai Song, please be careful. Some words should not be said irresponsibly. Ai Song's cheek twitched. Was the Imperial Army established by this boy? Why did they side with him so much? 2 Imperial Guard brothers, there is nothing going on here that needs your attention, so how about you go back to relax and drink some tea? Ling Han said with a smile. The 2 Imperial Guards threw a quick warning glance at Ai Song. Do not cause any trouble, or even the Earth and Water faction won't be able to shield you. Having said that, the 2 soon turned around and left. This made Ai Song realize that Ling Han's background was definitely not ordinary. He gave Ling Han a deep look, then said, young man, just what is your identity? So you don't know? How do you get by in the Imperial City? Ling Han shook his head, then continued, go back to Yang Tiandu. Tell him I'll be going on a walk to visit the Earth and Water faction soon, so he should prepare. What? Ai Song raised his voice involuntarily. You actually dare to come to our Earth and Water faction? What, do you want me to tell me that the Earth and Water faction is some kind of a dragon's pond or a tiger's cave? If there's really some dragon there, then it'll have to coil before me, and if there's a tiger, it'll have to lie down for me. Ling Han gestured for him to leave by waving his hands, and said, get lost, I have no time for a nobody like you. Good. 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 Ai Song clenched his teeth. First of all, he was unable to do anything with Hu Sen present here. Second of all, the Imperial Guards here were too chummy with Ling Han, calling them in again would be just a waste of time and effort. Filled with hate, he turned around and left. As for Ruanshizhong, he was naturally completely ignored by him. There were plenty of such nobodies in the Earth and Water faction, let alone one. Even if 100 or 1,000 died, it wouldn't matter. My lord, my lord. Ruanshizhong followed the departing Ai Song with a look full with despair. Ling Han even dared to break his arms in front of Ai Song, so would Ling Han kill him now? Ruan Shizhong couldn't help but tremble in fear and almost pissed himself. Don't worry, I abide by the law. How could I possibly kill you? Ling Han smiled at him. Well, what are you waiting for? Lead the way. We're going for a walk to the Earth and Water faction. Ruan Shizhong and his 4 sidekicks were helpless, and could only go forward to lead the way while secretly praying that Ling Han would walk right into a trap upon their arrival and suffer big time. However, when they saw that the number of people following Ling Han was over 100, they almost pissed themselves again. Chapter 195, Barging In. Ling Han and his group made for a grand display. There was a smile with hidden depths around the lips of Guang Yuan and the rest. They were all lone cultivators and had untamed temperaments, but none of them were idiots. When they saw the attitude of those 2 imperial guards, they realized that Ling Han was definitely someone from a prominent background. After all, even the imperial guards seemed to have gone blind and acted so partial towards him in the conflict. It seemed like there wouldn't be any mishaps happening on this trip. There were only 3 spiritual ocean tier and a few dozen gushing spring tier martial artists in the Earth and Water faction, much worse off than their group in terms of quality. The group proudly walked through the streets, and soon arrived at the Earth and Water faction. Though the Earth and Water faction was named a faction, in truth, there was not much difference between it and any other ordinary clan-based party. They had a very large courtyard in the imperial city, and all the high-ranking leaders of the faction lived here. Currently, there was a state of alert in the area at the main doors. Obviously, AI Song had returned with his information and the Earth and Water faction had reacted accordingly. Mister, you first snatched a treasure from one of the members of our faction, and now you come here so forcefully. Do you think that there is no one who can stand against you in our Earth and Water faction and are trying to bully us? An old man asked darkly, a very powerful aura emanating from him. Ling Han could not help but laugh. It seemed that the Earth and Water faction mistakenly believed that the whole matter was due to the golden flower of the stone. He shook his head, and said, Your intelligence department is really too poor, isn't it? You crashed so many of my shops, and don't even know who I am? The old man was an elder of the Earth and Water faction, in the 2nd layer of spiritual ocean tier. His name was Lu Yu. He stared at Ling Han for a moment, but still thought that the latter looked unfamiliar to him. True, crashing the shops of others was only a small business for the Earth and Water faction, and could not possibly disturb such a high-ranking person as he, so he had no idea that the faction had made this kind of enemy. At this moment, a nearby middle-aged man's expression changed. He approached and whispered quietly into Lu Yu's ear. The old man nodded slightly and assumed a disapproving expression. Fuck, so it's just a small matter of several clothing stores being smashed. In Lu Yu's opinion, how could the value of a few clothing stores compare to the golden flower in the stone? You snatched a treasure from one of the members of the faction, and its value was several hundred times the value of those clothing stores that had been smashed. No matter how he looked at it, it was the Earth and Water faction that was the victim here. This brat had to be a young master from some wealthy family, spoilt since his birth. That was why he had been so impulsive, actually coming over to seek vengeance just because a few of his stores had been crashed. I don't know what you're talking about. You're simply trying to smear the name of our faction. Lu Yu completely denied the accusation of his stores being smashed by members of the faction. This was after all nothing to be proud of. The Earth and Water faction was a faction of hooligans and ruffians in the eyes of the residents of the Imperial City. They had a high opinion of themselves. Leave behind the golden flower in the stone and pay a further compensation of 10 million, then you can get lost, he said aggressively to Ling Han. Ling Han laughed, and said, how overbearing. However, do you have the ability to be overbearing? He walked towards the main doors. Insolence. Immediately, someone jumped out and stretched out a hand to grab Ling Han's throat, intending to subdue him in a single move. Get lost. A person also jumped out from behind Ling Han. The light of his sword flowed like water and swept towards that man who had jumped out earlier. That man of the earth and water faction could not help but tense up and hurriedly bent to avoid the blow. There was now a middle-aged man standing in front of Ling Han, wielding a sword and exuding aura that was not the slightest bit weaker than his. Ling Han did not even pause in his steps, and continued his advance. Such a contemptuous attitude greatly enraged the people of the earth and water faction. They all jumped out and charged towards Ling Han. However, those people that Ling Han had hired were naturally not going to be paid for not doing anything. They too jumped out and protected Ling Han. This was a battle of 100 against 13. Ling Han's side was greatly at the advantage. Moreover, there were still 7 spiritual ocean tier elites who had yet to make a move. It was only now that Lu Yu discovered that there were 7 people whose aura was not any weaker than his, and he could not help but tense up. If they were in gushing spring tier, it would be useless no matter how many there were. He would only need to heavily injure a few of them quickly, and it was practically guaranteed that the rest would flee like rats. Lone cultivators were more ruthless than anyone at times when they were at an advantageous position, but once they fell into a disadvantage, then they would definitely be like a sheet of loose sand, and flee faster than anyone else. However, there now actually appeared 7 people in spiritual ocean tier. This could be problematic. This brat was indeed very wealthy, actually managing to hire spiritual ocean tier elites. No wonder he dared to come here to challenge them. Lu Yu thought for a moment, then said, "Friends, no matter what kind of conditions this brat has promised you, as long as you all choose to stand by and do nothing today, then whatever reward he has promised you will be from our earth and water faction." He was quite a decisive man. Guang Yuan laughed, and said, "Elder Lu, a man has to be true to his word. Moreover, we have already accepted the mission at the Heaven Military Hall. If we drop the ball now, who would dare to hire us in future?" "You know who I am?" Lu Yu asked. Elder Lu Yu's nickname is Soft Light Needle. No one would know when you used your hidden weapons, who would not recognize you. Guang Yuan said calmly, then gave a wave of his hand and said, "The main character today is young Master Han. Anything you want to say it to young Master Han. We are just responsible for ensuring his safety." Old fox. Lu Yu cursed internally. He had wanted to use the earth and water faction to force them to submit, but he easily pushed all the responsibility onto Ling Han. This gave him a feeling like he had thrown a punch into a ball of wool. It was not a good feeling. "Brat, if you stop now, it's still not too late," he said to Ling Han. "As long as you pay the compensation for the losses of our faction, fuck." While he was chattering, Ling Han had suddenly thrown a powerful punch and actually punched down the inscribed sign hanging over their doors. With a pang, it fell onto the ground. The sign was made of bronze, and when it crashed onto the floor, it created a loud noise that shocked quite a few people. When the people of the earth and water faction saw this, their eyes reddened. That was the signboard of the earth and water faction. As the saying went, when you get into a fight, never aim for the face. This signboard was equivalent to the face of the earth and water faction, and now was punched down by Ling Han onto the ground. Naturally, everyone was enraged. Ling Han smiled calmly, and said, "You seem to have had quite a lot of fun in my stores last night. Today I will let you enjoy the same thing too." He raised his foot before suddenly slamming it down. The strength of a martial artist in the 9th layer of element gathering tier burst out, and the signboard was instantly broken into 2 halves. "You're seeking death." The members of the earth and water faction were all greatly enraged, wanting nothing more than to tear Ling Han into pieces. Though murder was against the law in the imperial city, it did not mean that you still had to endure it when your enemies were at your doorstep. There would be no punishment for those who injured others or even killed their enemies in self-defense. Ignorant brat. Lu Yu's killing intent was on full display. He leaped towards Ling Han, raised his hand and xiao, 9 golden needles flew out. These needles were instilled with his unique origin power and had the ability to pierce through any defenses of origin power. It was a vicious attack. Elder Yu, your opponent is me. Guang Yuan gave a loud shout. His body lightly trembled and actually shone with an endless golden light, as if he was a Buddha. He struck out with one hand, and shouted, "The teachings of Buddha is without boundary, surpassing death." Hong, the golden light shone resplendently, indescribably vast and powerful. Ling Han did not even spare a glance. He simply continued to stride forward and entered the Earth and Water faction's headquarters. He smiled slightly, and said to Hunyo, "Come, come, come. Let's have a little contest, and see who can make more damage. Nyo will definitely win." Hunyo said in exhilaration. Chapter 196, Paying Compensation. Ling Han and Hunyo both wreaked great havoc. With a punch and a kick, the mayhem began, starting from the main doors onwards. Whatever they saw, they destroyed, creating a path of ruin and destruction towards the main hall, leaving wreckage and damage behind them. Of course, there were even more members of the Earth and Water faction who had jumped out to stop them, but Ling Han had hired as many as 100 gushing-tier martial artists, and now was the time to make use of them. They too jumped out and blocked the incoming attacks, ensuring Ling Han's safety. When Ling Han led his path of destruction all the way to the main hall, what was originally a beautiful garden and an elegant corridor was already in complete disorder. Ruined flowers were here and there, broken pieces of the pillars were all over the floor. It was as if there was a demolition project going on in this place. "Stop it!" A mighty voice was heard, and a tall, old man appeared. There was an endless frosty and powerful aura exuding from his whole body, filled with the forceful air of a person who had occupied a high social rank for a long time. It was the faction leader of the Earth and Water faction, whose cultivation level was in the 5th layer of spiritual ocean tier. Everyone could not help but stop moving. The reputation of a person was like the shadow cast by a tree. No matter what, Yang Tiandu was still the leader of a faction, and so naturally had his own influence. However, it seems that his influence and reputation had no obvious effect on the demolishing duo. Quang! Peng! Guang! Ling Han and Hunyo were very much enjoying the process of spreading damage, and there were even more things that could be broken in the main hall, such as tables, chairs, vases, screens, and so on. Especially in Hunyo's case. She had been raised by a ferocious beast in the first place, so there was a thirst for blood and destruction flowing in her veins. This nature had only been temporarily repressed at Ling Han's side, and was now being slowly set free. She bared her little canines, fully displaying her fierce nature, as if she herself was a little tiger. "I told you two to stop!" Yang Tiandu shouted in fury. His voice became a ripple that swept out towards Ling Han and Hunyo. Hunyo's figure twisted and dodged, as if she could teleport, and actually managed to dodge the sound wave created by this shout miraculously. Meanwhile, Ling Han's left hand moved, and the blood-sucking origin gold transformed into a concave mirror. The power of the sound wave collected in front of it and was reflected back in a straight line. With a pu, it actually crushed the legs of a nearby member of the Earth and Water faction into a foam of blood. Ling Han withdrew the origin gold, shook his head and said, "Leader Yang is indeed unrivaled in your power. Merely one shout and you can actually liquefy the flesh and blood of a human being. You truly deserve the name of an elite in spiritual ocean tier. However, why had you attacked your own people? Could it be he cuckolded you?" Even if Yang Tiandu was a subtle person by nature, he could not help but turn green after hearing such words. He said coldly, "Brat, a loose tongue may cause a lot of trouble. You're definitely going to die today." He suddenly moved, moving as fast as a lightning bolt. With a single leap, he was right in front of Ling Han, and stretched out his hand in a strike. Get lost. Guang Yuan moved, becoming a golden Buddha. He struck out with a palm strike, and golden light filled the air. Pang! The two elites clashed head-on for a single strike, and both of them were slightly trembling from the force. Then they each took 7 steps back. However, Guang Yuan's expression changed slightly, and he took another step back and finally managed to steady his footing. This was because he suffered from an ailment. If not, he would definitely not have been at a disadvantage in this clash. Shatter a mountain with 7 punches, Guang Yuan. With one glance, Yang Tiandu recognized his opponent. Sword of Rioting Shadows, Yang Tiandu. Guang Yuan said calmly. Yang Tiandu could not help but become cautious. Guang Yuan was also in the 5th layer of spiritual ocean tier. Though the latter had been at a slight disadvantage in that clash of blows just now, if there was another person who joined forces with him, that would be enough to oppose him. Ling Han had in total 7 spiritual ocean tier elites on his side, while he only had 3 on his side. In terms of numbers, he was at too much of a disadvantage. Brother Guang Yuan, why do you need to involve yourself with this nasty business? Why don't you choose to stand by and do nothing, and in return, I shall owe you a debt. Agreed? Yang Tiandu decided to restrain his displeasure for the moment. Guang Yuan laughed disdainfully, and said, Is the great leader Yang not aware of the grand reputation of the earth and water faction? I dare not accept a debt from you. Yang Tiandu was so angry he was shaking. This was completely ridiculing him. However, Guang Yuan's words took a swift turn. We are only hired to protect young Master Han. As long as young Master Han is unharmed, we would of course not make a move. Thus, why won't the great leader Yang give us all some face and let Ling Han take a walk around here and go for a look around, and we can just enjoy some tea and chat in the meanwhile. How about it? How about it, your sister? All the members of the Earth and Water faction looked like they wanted to commit murder. This walk of Ling Han was not the slightest bit peaceful. From the moment he had entered, he had started his path of destruction, and was even worse than a gang of bandits suddenly set upon them. If they allowed him to walk around for a while, then would there be an undamaged tile left in the headquarters of the Earth and Water faction? Yang Tiandu's eyes swept over the group, and his eyes suddenly lit up. He asked, Everyone, you only need to ensure the safety of this young man, right? Naturally. Guang Yuan and the others nodded. Then this young girl and the little girl should not be included in your protection, right? A cold smirk curled around the corners of Yang Tiandu's lips. He was talking about Lu Yutong and Hunyo. Indeed, no. Guang Yuan and the others shook their heads. Good. Yang Tiandu gave a wave of his hand, pointed at Lu Yutong and Hunyo, and commanded, Apprehend the 2 of them. He calmed down and lifted his teacup for a sip, feeling that everything was back under his control. Yes, faction leader. The members of the Earth and Water faction all got the wind back into their sails. They had finally found a weakness, and could finally turn the tables and get back into control. Ling Han laughed, and said, Allow me to introduce. This beautiful young miss has the surname of Lu, and the given name of Yutong. She is the princess of the Lu clan of the 8 great clans. Hee, I am really impressed, great leader Yang. You are indeed very brave to actually dare to make a move on even the young miss of the Lu clan. Awesome, there would definitely be no one else with such overwhelming courage like you. Pooh. Yang Tiandu instantly spat out a mouthful of hot tea. How could Lu Yu, who had been beside him, foreseen such a sneak attack? As a result, his whole face was covered with tea. His eyebrows, hair, and beard were all stuck onto his face. Stop. Yang Tiandu did not have the time to comfort Lu Yu and hurriedly shouted at his underlings to stop. If they actually dared to come to blows with the princess of the Lu clan, then most likely, the powerful elites of the Lu clan would soon come over and turn the whole earth and water faction upside down. It is indeed the young miss of the Lu clan. I've seen her once before. She's one of the twin pearls of the imperial city. Who would not have heard of her? She is indeed shockingly beautiful. Why would she be with such a detestable brat? The people of the earth and water faction mumbled amongst themselves. Even the princess of the Lu clan was involved. They seemed to smell a scent of danger. Could it be that the Lu clan was displeased with them, and had deliberately sent Ling Han over to give them a little punishment? Don't misunderstand. Ling Han smiled slightly, and took the initiative to explain, this has nothing to do with the Lu clan. The reason I came today is actually very simple. Last night, you guys crashed my Yutong. How many of our stores have been crashed? 47, Lu Yutong instantly answered. You guys crashed 47 of my stores, so I have come today to get some justice. Ling Han grinned. How much do you intend to pay to compensate for my loss? Fuck, you came to make damage and destruction at the earth and water faction, and actually want us to give you an explanation? The people of the earth and water faction were all furious at this. They usually bullied the commoners and acted tyrannical on the streets, doing all kinds of bad deeds. They could be considered quite shameless people themselves, but now they realized that compared with Ling Han's shamelessness, they paled in comparison. You came to make trouble at our faction, and still want our faction to pay you compensation? Yang Tiandu was so extremely furious that he laughed, his tone cold and dark. Not paying? Ling Han grinned. Then I'll just continue to spread destruction. Chapter 197, Reporting to the Authorities. Quang. 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 Ling Han moved and mercilessly went back to his path of destruction. Hunyo had already returned to Ling Han's side, to avoid being ambushed by the earth and water faction. If she were captured and held hostage, then Ling Han would still be slightly troubled. Stop! The men of earth and water faction once again tried to stop him. But one move from them, and Guang Yuan and his group would move as well, creating a domino effect and once again inciting the start of a battle royale. Please do not make things difficult for us, fellows, Guang Yuan and his group said. Asterisk 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 asterisk. There were already some men of the earth and water faction who had spat out blood in their overwhelming rage. It was this brat who had first come to their place to make trouble, but why were they the ones being advised not to make a move and create trouble for him? Was there any such logic in this world? Whatever Ling Han saw, he would smash. Hunyo had transformed into a creature of violence and destroyed the furniture and ornaments in the place, reducing them to an indescribable state. Though there were only two of them, one adult and one child, but how could the destructive power of gushing spring tear be taken lightly? This vase is not bad. Ling Han picked up a vase, and with a quang, it had shattered into 100 pieces. He shrugged, and said, "Io, my hand slipped." Quang, and another delicate vase was shattered. My hand slipped again. Quang. Why is my hand so slippery today? Great leader Yang, whenever you have made the decision to compensate me, you can come over and discuss it with me. Ling Han said with a smile as he smashed a painting that had been hanging on the wall of the main hall into pieces, causing Hunyo to clap her hands in delight. Because the painting depicted a fierce tiger with white eyes that had been hung up. It had obviously offended the little girl. Yang Tiandu's face was dark and cold. After gritting his teeth for a moment, he said, "Make a report to the Imperial Guards. Tell them that someone has trespassed into our residence illegally and is committing a crime here." Leader. The members of the Earth and Water faction all exclaimed in shock. If they actually reported this to the Imperial Guards, then what would be left of their reputation? They were a great faction, and were actually forced by a young man to the extent that they had to get the Imperial Guards to solve the issue. If this news spread out, then what pride would they have left? Do you think that it'll help our pride to have this kind of situation continue? Yang Tian-du humphed. The rest all immediately fell silent. That's right. Ling Han was currently very much enjoying his destruction and devastation, yet they could only stand by and watch helplessly. If the situation continued, was this anything to be proud of? I'll go. Lu Yu gritted his teeth and accepted this mission. He really could not bear to just stand by and watch helplessly as Ling Han continued on his path of devastation, so he might as well leave. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. Then it's up to you, Elder Lu, Yang Tian-du said. Lu Yu left. Now that they were at this level, the people of the Earth and Water faction decided they might as well get over it, and simply wait for the Imperial Guards to deal with Ling Han. One had to know that the Empire had its own laws. Publicly destroying the private residence of another was also quite a serious crime. After only about half an hour, Lu Yu returned with a troop of several dozen Imperial Guards. Though they were not a large number, and the one walking in the lead was only in gushing spring tear, their identity as Imperial Guards was still there. Would Guang Yuan and his group still dare to go against these Imperial Guards? If they dared to make a move, that would mean becoming an enemy of the Empire, and that equated to a major offense of treason. The men of the Earth and Water faction had never been so desperate to see the Imperial Guards until this moment. Their eyes had turned red in their excitement and they went up to receive them. Their greetings and reception were so warm that the Imperial Guards experienced a bit of a shock. These guys were smiling in a way that was a bit scary. We're all men here. Why are you grabbing onto my hand, and still not letting go? Could it be that you're interested in me? Captain Zhua. Yang Tian-du greeted the minor captain of the Imperial Guards, and said, "There is a madman creating great damage in this place of mine, and disregards the laws of the Empire entirely. Please arrest him, and punish him severely according to the laws." Captain Zhua looked strangely at him, and asked, "With your ability, you are still unable to apprehend this madman, Master Yang?" The members of the Earth and Water faction all flushed, while Yang Tian-du simply said composedly, "We are all good citizens who obey the laws, so how could we so easily resort to force? Our first reaction was naturally to make a report to Captain Zhua, and get the Imperial Guards to arrest the criminal. This is the natural course of events, and abides by the laws of our nation. TSK, TSK, TSK. How nice these words sound." Captain Zhua's face twitched violently. He was naturally aware of the kind of characters that were in the Earth and Water faction. When he heard Yang Tian-du call himself a good citizen, he suddenly felt an urge to throw up. Thankfully, he managed to repress this urge. Otherwise, if he had really thrown up over Yang Tian-du, then it would not be easily explained even if he were a minor captain of the Imperial Guards. Ha ha ha, Leader Yang's tolerance is really impressive, making me think of an animal called the tortoise. Guang Yuan laughed loudly. If Leader Yang returns home one day and sees a lecherous criminal trying to do that to your beautiful little concubine, would Leader Yang still abide by the laws of the Empire, and first make a report to the Imperial Guards? Naturally. One of the other lone cultivators laughed as well. But is it really good to be cuckolded like this? Who knows, perhaps Master Yang has never had any children all these years, and so would bear being cuckolded just to become a happy father. Ha ha ha. The rest of the lone cultivators did not hold much respect for anyone in the first place, so they too joined in on the raucous laughter. Yang Tian-du was so enraged he was shaking. However, he only pretended he had not heard anything, and said, "Captain Zhua, please uphold justice." "All right." Captain Zhua agreed. This was part of his duties. "Where is the madman?" "There." Yang Tian-du pointed at a place where smoke and dust was wafting out from. Obviously, Ling Han was currently creating damage there. Captain Zhuo waved his hand, and brought his men over. After a moment, he finally spotted Ling Han and Hu Niu, who were in the midst of their fun and delighting in their destruction. Instantly, his heart trembled. He had seen Ling Han's portrait before. That was when a strict command had come from his superiors. As long as Ling Han did not do something atrocious like committing murder, then no matter what other things he did, the Imperial Guards were to turn a blind eye to it, and if he encountered any danger, they were to even help him out. Captain Zhuo, please act quickly, to avoid a greater loss, Yang Tiandu said from the side, for there was suddenly no movement from Captain Zhuo. Captain Zhuo gave a sigh, shook his head, and said, I don't have the ability to deal with this issue. What? Yang Tiandu had a sudden urge to go on a rampage. Not even the Imperial Guards were able to deal with this. Are you messing around with me? Master Yang, you're on your own. Captain Zhuo revealed a meaningful smile. Additionally, let me give Master Yang a word of warning. You must definitely not injure this person. Otherwise, I would have no choice but to arrest you. Fuck. Yang Tiandu was currently feeling very depressed. He invited the Imperial Guards over to help him out, but now they were actually all on the other side. How could he endure this? Captain Zhuo did not say anything else. With a wave of his hand, the several dozen men all stood at one side, as if they were there to keep Yang Tiandu under surveillance. All of a sudden, the members of the Earth and Water faction cursed Captain Zhuo and all his ancestors. How could they be bullied to this extent? Pung! 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 On the other side, Ling Han and Hu Niu were still causing great damage and destruction, and from the looks of it, they would not desist unless the whole Earth and Water faction was destroyed. Yang Tiandu sighed, closed his eyes, and curled his hands into fists. Because he had used too much strength, his hands were slightly trembling. After a moment, he snapped open his eyes, and said, Young Master Han, let us come and discuss the matter of compensation. He decided to yield. There was no other way. If it was a clash of power, Ling Han had 7 spiritual ocean tier elites and 100 gushing spring tier martial artists behind him, which was enough to dominate the Earth and Water faction. If they went the official route, Ling Han was even more awesome. The Imperial Guards not only did not deal with the issue, but would also step up to protect him. What else could he do then? Ha ha ha. Guang Yuan and his group laughed loudly. Leader Yang's divine art of the tortoise is indeed practiced to the point of perfection. You can really pull back so smoothly and so easily. I'm impressed. I definitely wouldn't be able to learn this art. Chapter 198, Agree to Compensate. Reverie _ Faced with these mockeries and ridicules, Earth and Water factions members could only silently endure all kinds of insults, letting people slap their face. Ling Han stopped, looked at Yang Tiandu, and laughed. Leader Yang, how do you plan to compensate me? Yang Tiandu's teeth crackled, but circumstances prevail over men, so he said solemnly, 100,000 silvers. As he said the words, he only felt a burn on his face, as if someone slapped him fiercely. He was the master of a faction and a formidable spiritual ocean tier cultivator who would have thought he'd lower his head to an element gathering tier youngster. This was a great humiliation. Ling Heng laughed aloud, then said, Leader Yang, are you dismissing a beggar? Based on Earth and Water factions' affluence and power, you ought to pay several million silvers, right? Bull crap. Yang Tiandu almost threw a fit. Several million silvers, why don't you go rob that? Earth and Water faction was equivalent to a middle-class clan, and because they were willing to do dirty work, their income was certainly more than that of a middle-class clan. Ling Han quoted several millions right off the bat. How could he not be agitated? Even if the entire Earth and Water faction was sold, he wouldn't be able to get that sum of money. Impossible, he said definitively. Honestly, 100,000 silvers already hurt his heart. If there wasn't another way, how could he submit? Ling Han laid out his hands, and said, anyways, I've plenty of time to sit here and drink tea, watch a show, and wait for Leader Yang to change your mind. Bam bam bam. Hunyo was still causing mass destruction. The little girl was a human-shaped monster. Despite ramming into walls, which fell one after another, she remained unscathed, laughing and enjoying herself greatly. If it was before, Yang Tiandu might have taken down Hunyo, but having seen the Imperial Guard's attitude, he knew that Ling Han had an incredibly scary background. This time, he could only swallow the insult bitterly. He waved people over, and after understanding the details of the situation, he said, Young Master Han, this faction knows not which stores belong to you. One who does not know is not guilty. We are willing to fully compensate, so please, young Master Han, have the generosity to let this go. As for the matter of Earth and Water faction being trashed, he naturally did not bring it up and just accepted it as a lesson for provoking someone he shouldn't. Of course, he could still get Cheng Yunxiang to pay. Cheng family caused this trouble to begin with. Earth and Water factions' disciples all revealed embarrassed and angry expressions, but dared not speak due to Ling Han's influence. They only felt that it was the most shameful day of their lives. Ling Han swept them with a glance, and said, You guys refused to accept it? Why were you guys so insensible yesterday then, to have started trouble at my property? But, Leader Yang is willing to compromise, so I'll give you a chance. Pay 100,000 silvers first, then tear down Chen family's stores every day. Yang Tiandu looked at Captain Zhua and said, We are fine subjects that respect justice and abide by the law. Don't start this nonsense. Ling Han resolutely shook his hands in admonition, and said, I don't mind staying here for a while longer. Looking at Yang Tiandu suffer humiliation, Earth and Water factions' disciples felt miserable and angry, wishing to run right up to tear Ling Han to pieces. However, seeing the Imperial Guards that were running them down with unfriendly gazes, they had to abandon their intentions. Good. Yang Tiandu was unexpectedly straightforward, coming to a resolution quickly and gritting his teeth in agreement. He waved his hand, and very quickly a man came carrying an embroidered box. After receiving it, he threw it to Ling Han. Ling Han opened it to see 10 silver notes lying inside, each of 10,000 denomination. He smiled slightly, walked in front of Captain Zhua, handed over the silver notes, and said, Captain Zhua, this is a small token of appreciation for the trouble in coming over. Eat sumptuously afterwards. Hiss, this guy was a bit too generous. That was 100,000 silvers, not 10 pieces of toilet paper. Captain Zhua promptly declined, and said, No need, no need. Protecting the citizens' safety is our obligation as Imperial Guards. Hearing those words made Earth and Water factions' disciples want to beat someone. Why didn't you say anything when Ling Han acted violently? How extremely partial. Take it, I can't let you brothers come for nothing. Ling Han shoved the silver notes to him. For him, 100,000 silvers was like a drizzle. Besides, this was Earth and Water factions' tainted money, which he didn't want to touch at all. Only then did Captain Zhua put away the silver notes, filled with gratitude towards Ling Han. Even though he couldn't take all 100,000 for himself as he'd have to hand over the majority upwards when he returned, he could still get 10,000 or so, a decent amount of easy money. Yang Tiandu's face twitched. That was his money, but it was used by Ling Han to pretend to be generous, and yet he didn't even receive a thank you. Young Master Han, you're satisfied now, right? He had to endure the extreme humiliation, the veins on his forehead popping out. Hee hee. Ling Han laughed lightly, and said, I suppose so. Leader Yang, don't forget my earlier demands. If I see any of Chen family's stores still open, then I'll take these friends here for some tea. I definitely won't let young Master Han down. Yang Tiandu grumbled, almost to the point of roaring. Now, you can let that little girl stop. He pointed at Hunyo. Ling Han had stopped, but the little girl didn't, and she was still knocking down wall after wall. After a wall got knocked down, she would laugh endearingly like it was very fun. Ling Han laughed aloud, and said, "Nyo nyo, time to go home. I still want to play." The little girl showed that she was not yet content. "Let's go eat meat." Ling Han tempted. "Meat! Meat! Meat!" Hunyo immediately hopped on and hung on Ling Han like a monkey. "Everyone, we'll meet again as long as time stands." Ling Han walked off swaggeringly. Guang Yuan and the rest followed him. Naturally, the Imperial Guards retreated right after, leaving Earth and Water factions people too pained for even tears as they beheld the scene of desolation in their headquarters. Ling Han first went to Heavenly Martial Palace to update the request as finished, so that the masses could receive their pay. "Young Master Han, thank you. If you have assignments like this hereafter, remember to call us brothers." The people talked to him one after another. It was just a fight without any risks and they earned 10,000. This assignment was definitely good. The assignments they accepted previously, like going to a robber's den to kill someone, were filled with danger, which could easily get them killed. They were basically using their lives to make money. The several formidable spiritual ocean tier cultivators all made an exception and smiled at Ling Han. A financial backer like Ling Han was someone even they wanted to be on friendly terms with, but they were embarrassed to express it too overtly due to their status of martial artists in spiritual ocean tier. Everyone dispersed, but Guang Yuan stayed behind as he still had to consult Ling Han about the problems with his cultivation. "Tell me, what do you want me to do?" Guang Yuan said. Although he complied to be hired by Ling Han, he also received pay, so he obviously had to find another way to solve the issue on cultivation. Ling Heng cracked a smile, and said, "Be my attendant for a year." Chapter 199, Subduing Guang Yuan. Reverie _ Guang Yuan immediately snorted, and said, "A tiny element gathering tier martial artist like you has the impudence to ask me to be your attendant?" He was a cultivator at the formidable spiritual ocean tier, and what sort of concept is that? Right above spiritual ocean tier was spiritual pedestal tier, which was the strongest tier in the 8 large noble families and royal family. In other words, in Rain Country, there were only several hundred of those that could firmly suppress Guang Yuan. Rain Country's population was around 100 million, ranking in the top 100 out of 100 million, that was really kick-ass, wasn't it? "Change the condition," he said. "Then be my bodyguard for a year." Ling Han readily offered another condition. What difference was there? Guang Yuan opened his eyes wide. He had the urge to smack someone, but as he thought that Ling Han still had large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll secrets, he had to restrain his temper. "Change to another one. Say, old brother Guang, you're too picky. A no on the left and a no on the right, just forget it, I'm too lazy to spend my thoughts on this." Ling Han shrugged, and was about to take Hunyo's hand to leave. "Huh." After he walked 2 steps, he turned his head to say to Guang Yuan, "Old brother Guang, what are you suggesting by grabbing onto my clothes? Was this lord pulling on you, which I did you see that with?" Guang Yuan lied brazenly. Ling Heng laughed aloud, and said, "Old brother Guang, if I don't help you with your cultivation technique, you won't let me go? If you want to leave, just leave, this lord isn't a robber, how could I force you to stay here?" Guang Yuan spoke frankly and righteously, but his hand was clutching onto the corner of Ling Han's clothes, unwilling to let go. Ling Han laughed mischievously, and said, "Old brother Guang, just 1 year as a bodyguard, but in exchange there's hope for you to enter the spiritual pedestal tier, do you think you'd lose out on this deal?" Guang Yuan frowned. "Can you really promise that I'll break through to spiritual pedestal tier?" Unknowingly, he chose to believe this youngster's facile remark, so what if he resolves the hidden injuries? Breaking through to spiritual pedestal tier was still incomparably difficult. There were only so many spiritual pedestal tier cultivators in Rain Country, all of whom belonged to the imperial family and 8 great clans with the rare exception of other powerful parties, such as Heaven's Medicine Pavilion and Huyang Academy. It was unheard of for a lone cultivator to earn such an achievement. 3 Yang breaks heaven, Origin's lock is layered, Ling Hang suddenly quoted. Guang Yuan's complexion instantly changed, and he said, "How do you know Large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll's verbal chant?" "How strange, if I didn't know, then how would I fix your problem?" Ling Han smiled faintly. Guang Yuan sighed, and said, "You win." This boy kept his calm, appearing to have a sure hold of him. "Old brother Guang, don't be disappointed. You'll understand later that this is the best choice you've made in your entire life." Ling Han laughed. Guang Yuan shook his head, and said in helplessness, "Boy, you don't look like a master who settles in his place. This lord acting as your bodyguard will most definitely encounter some danger, maybe even handing over my life." "Don't worry, at most a little danger, death is impossible." Ling Han patted his shoulder. "Whatever, now that this lord has already decided to ride on your pirate ship, there's no need to think more of it." Guang Yuan was one who unexpectedly met gains and losses with equanimity, no longer fussing over being Ling Han's bodyguard for a year. Ling Han said, 3 Yang breaks heaven, Origin's lock is layered, this verbal chant is the problem when you cultivate. I met a person who was just like you, understanding those words as sealing origin power within the 3rd backbone. This certainly can increase explosiveness, but with time, it will cause immense damage. If you continue to cultivate this way, in no less than 3 years, your backbone will collapse, and you'll become a cripple. Guang Yuan couldn't help but be moved. For a formidable spiritual ocean tier cultivator, once their cultivation progress was lost, it was no different from dying. Moreover, with his recalcitrant personality, he often offended many people, and once he lost his cultivation, many people would definitely beat him when he was down. The terrible result of that need not be said. "May I ask young Master Han how this verbal chant should be interpreted?" He lowered his posture to seek guidance from Ling Han. Ling Han smiled slightly, speaking of which, it really was coincidental. In his previous life, he met someone who cultivated the Large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll and also derailed on that phrase of the verbal formula. Moreover, the situation back then was much worse as the man's backbone was completely shattered. He was entrusted to refine a heaven-grade pill that restored bones. Under careful consideration, he also took time to understand Large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll to be absolutely safe, and that was how he was able to see through Guang Yuan's problem with a glance. "Then let us talk it over," Ling Han said. After a few minutes, Guang Yuan revealed a faithful look. With each expression he became more solemn and respectful. In his mind, Ling Han's status rose infinitely. To know Large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll was already impressive, but he obtained the incomplete scroll in an ancient tomb. Knowing the technique was one thing, one only needed a superb memory to remember it. However, Ling Han surpassed the level of learning by rote, being even more knowledgeable about it than he was. It made him feel sudden enlightenment at times, with some parts that he normally didn't understand instantly becoming clear. No wonder Ling Han said that he had a chance to advance into spiritual pedestal tier. Ling Han's understanding was like that of a martial artist master, which made him feel extremely small. Ling Han took a glance at him, and revealed a smile. Subduing Guang Yuan was only on a whim as he considered Feng Yan's threat and how Wu Songlin and Fu Yuansheng couldn't wander behind his butt all day. However, at most in 1 year, he would definitely reach spiritual ocean tier and Guang Yuan would naturally be unable to help him. So, he set the period of a year. As for whether Guang Yuan wanted to leave or not, then that'd be based on whether or not he had the heart to take him under his wing. Guang Yuan had to make arrangements, so he promised to go find Ling Han 3 days later at Huyang Academy. A formidable spiritual ocean tier cultivator has so easily fallen under your control? Lu Yutong still somewhat couldn't believe it. A mere spiritual ocean tier. Ling Hang sighed. Put in his previous life, he wouldn't even want a spiritual ocean tier to watch his door, but he was too weak right now, so he'd have to make do with spiritual ocean tier. Lu Yutong rolled her eyes. If a formidable spiritual ocean tier cultivator entered Lu family, it'd be guaranteed that Lu family's top brass would welcome him and shower with heavy promises. Will you die if you don't show off? I'll be Ling Han's bodyguard too. Hunyo said, unwilling to be outdone. Ling Han laughed aloud, and said, good, from now on, I'll rely on Hunyo for protection. Hunyo instantly cracked a smile, appearing to be very happy. After the three returned to the academy, Lu Yutong returned to her quarters, and Ling Han held Hunyo's hand and returned to their courtyard. From afar, he saw a girl guarding the door, glancing around with an expression full of angst. It was Yun Shuang. What, is Madame Yen inviting me for a meal? Ling Han smiled as he said. Please, young Master Han, save me. Yun Shuang kneeled abruptly onto the ground. Chapter 200, Lady Yan's Plans. What's the matter? Ling Han asked. Yun Shuang only continued to weep. Thankfully, this place was quite remote. Otherwise, anyone would have thought Ling Han was bullying her. If you don't tell me, how am I supposed to help you? Fine, finish crying, then tell me. Ling Han opened the door and went back in. Right when he was about to close the door, Yun Shuang squeezed in and grabbed onto the corner of his shirt with a delicate hand. I say, why do all of you like to grab onto the corner of my shirt? It's understandable if it was Nyo, but men do this, and women do this too. I am really troubled by this, Ling Han said, shaking his head. Hunyo gave a strong nod, and made her opinion clear. Ling Han is Nyo's. Milady, it was obvious Yun Shuang was not in the mood for jokes. She had just opened her mouth to explain when she started to cry again. Ling Han sighed, and said, in 3 breaths time, if you still persist in sniveling, I'll throw you out. So mean. Lu Ru'er walked out of the house, and glared harshly at Ling Han. It seems that it would not be enough to just simply throw one out. Ling Han shuffled his sleeves. Damn scoundrel, let me tell you. I have already recovered about 70% of my cultivation, and no longer need to fear your threats. Lu Ru'er said proudly. Then why aren't the two of you quickly getting lost? Everything you eat and use every day is mine, don't you know all that needs money? Ling Han said in irritation. Lu Ru'er instantly exploded in anger. She felt that this guy did not have the slightest inclination to feel tender and protective towards women. It was obvious that she and her sister were rare beauties, but this guy did not bear any ideas or intentions towards them at all. What a weirdo. Could it be that he preferred men? That was possible. Otherwise, how could he simply ignore the charm of her sister and her? When she thought about this, she could not help but feel a shiver all over her body. But after being interrupted by the banter between the two of them, Yun Shuang finally regained her composure, and said, please take me in, young Master Han. Shuang has no other place to go. Ling Han was startled, and said, aren't you of the Cherishing Flower Pavilion? But you actually came here to beg me for shelter, what kind of logic is that? Do you all think that my place is a garbage collection ground? 1, 2, and now 3, and who knows if there will be even more in the future. Lu Ru'er was instantly furious, and said, who are you calling garbage? Young Master Han, milady. Milady is too cruel. Yun Shuang once again began to weep. All right. Just calm yourself and speak slowly. Start from the beginning. Don't keep speaking in one breath and crying in the next, otherwise, I really wouldn't be able to stand it, Ling Han said. Come, sit down first. Lu Ru'er rolled her eyes at Ling Han, and helped Yun Shuang into the house. After helping her to sit down, she even fetched a cup of hot tea to calm Yun Shuang down. Ling Han looked at Hunyo, and Hunyo looked back at him. The two simultaneously shrugged. They were the real owners, but why was it they seemed more like outsiders here? Yun Shuang held onto the cup of tea and rested for a while before finally opening her mouth and telling her story. Yan Tianzhao managing to awake was supposed to be a good thing, but for Yun Shuang, it was the beginning of her nightmare. She had coincidentally eavesdropped on a conversation between Lady Yan and Yan Tianzhao. It seemed that it was not because Lady Yan wanted a place to invest her energy and hopes into that she had been adopted. Instead, there had been a different motive for her adoption right from the beginning. She was a furnace. Lady Yan most likely knew that her son would not be able to awaken for quite some time, but there was only so much optimal time for cultivation for a martial artist, so how could she allow her son to lag behind at the starting line? It just so happened that she had obtained an unusual cultivation technique that was divided into two main and subsidiary techniques. The subsidiary technique was to be cultivated by one person, while the main technique was to be cultivated by another. When the time came, as long as the two people cultivated together, then the person who had cultivated the main technique would be able to easily swallow the person who had cultivated the subsidiary technique, her cultivation and even vitality. And the cultivation technique that she had practiced since her childhood was precisely the subsidiary technique, in order for her to pave the way for Yan Tianzhao. The reason why they had not taken action immediately was because Yan Tianzhao had only just awakened, and had just begun to cultivate the main technique. As long as he was slightly accomplished in his cultivation, they would take action, and by that time, not only would Yun Shuang lose all her cultivation, she would also lose her vitality. She would, in an extremely short period of time, become an old woman. If Milady had treated me sincerely, I am willing to die for Milady, no questions asked. But I can't accept this. Yun Shuang had cried so much, her eyes were red. She's so evil. Too evil. Lu Ru'er wiped her tears as well where she was standing. She was so easily moved to tears that Ling Han mocked her inside his head. Hey, you're an assassin, okay? Don't be so emotional, all right? Ling Han pondered for a moment, then said, Lady Yan has been active for so many years, and must have a very wide system of connections and a similarly wide information network in the imperial city. The fact that you're staying here would not be able to stay hidden for very long. At that time, when Lady Yan comes to seek you out, would you be able to resist? If she decided that she wanted to take her adopted daughter with her, that would be a right and proper thing. Even the laws of the empire would side with Lady Yan. If Ling Han attempted to stop her, then it would be he who had kidnapped her daughter. Ling Han had his backers, but so did Lady Yan, and her backer was also very powerful. Yun Shuang could not help but pale, and began to shudder. She would rather die than be taken back by Lady Yan. That's right. Those two girls should have mostly recovered from their injuries. Why don't you go with them and leave Rain Country? Ling Han suggested to Yun Shuang. That would be great, he'd be able to solve 3 huge problems in one go. Who told you we were leaving Rain Country? Lu Ru'er leaped up. I am definitely going to kill that traitor. I think you're more likely to die than kill anyone. Ling Han pointed out, dampening her enthusiasm, and continued, it would be better if the two of you return and work hard on your cultivation. Su Kuxian has been deceived once, so she would definitely not fall into the trap a second time. The two of you no longer have the chance to set up a trap to ambush her. Lu Ru'er pouted. She wanted to argue, but knew that Ling Han was telling the truth. The power gap between the two of them and Su Ku Xian was too large, and they had also lost the advantage of taking the initiative. Thus, it was practically impossible for them to once again attempt to assassinate Su Ku Xian. Mr. Ling is right. Lu Feng walked out as well, and said, when we finally recover from our injuries, we will immediately leave Rain Country. We are extremely grateful for how you have taken care of us for this period of time, and hope that there will be a chance for us two sisters to repay your kindness, Mr. Ling. It would be the best repayment for me if you leave, Ling Han said bluntly. N. Hunyo nodded seriously as well. This detestable guy. Lu Ru'er humphed, and said, scoundrel, if you come to Fire Country in the future and get into trouble, remember to look for us. We will definitely take very good care of you. She emphasized the words, very good, heavily. Obviously, she held a big grudge towards him. All right. You can stay with the two sisters for tonight, and leave after a few days, Ling Han said to Yun Shuang, pretending he had not heard anything. Thank you, young Master Han. Thank you, Mrs. Yun Shuang lowered into a bow. Pang. It was at this moment that there came a knock on the door, causing the four of them to be startled at the same time. Mr. Ling, are you there? A soft, sweet voice was heard from outside, yet it was this voice that caused Yun Shuang to shiver uncontrollably. Her face had paled completely from terror. Lady Yen, the Lu sisters mouthed. Ling Han nodded. Kill her. Instantly, Lu Ru'er was boiling with killing intent. Chapter 201, Probe. Kill your sister. Ling Han snorted. You're rebuking me? Lu Ru'er felt extremely wronged, and immediately pouted. The person outside is in spiritual ocean tier. Ling Han exclaimed. Lu Ru'er was instantly silenced. It was precisely a spiritual ocean tier elite, Su Ku Xian, that she and her sister had lost to. If they had been able to kill a powerful martial artist like that, then they would have had no need to hide here to recover from their injuries. Then what do we do? Yun Shuang turned towards Ling Han. Having not completely shrugged off Lady Yan's authority, she was completely at a loss what to do. Ling Han thought for a moment, then said, all of you go and hide inside the inner room. The three girls quickly rushed into the inner room, whereas Ling Han walked towards the main door and opened it. At the doorway, Lady Yen was standing in a beautiful pose, exuding a mature, exquisite grace. It was definitely not something that a wet behind-the-ears young girl could compare to. She smiled softly, and asked, what were you busy with, Mr. Ling? I was waiting for quite a while outside here. She was suspicious. Ling Han was naturally calm and collected. This woman held a deep, powerful love for her son, there was no doubt about that. However, he had never thought that she would have schemes so terrifyingly profound. She had already included Yun Shuang in her plans quite a few years ago. If it was not for the fact that Yun Shuang had so coincidentally overheard the conversation between her and Yen Tianzhao, then perhaps Yun Shuang would still feel overwhelmingly grateful to her, even until the moment of her death. But when he thought about it, how could Lady Yen be a simple character if she was able to make the business of cherishing Flower Pavilion into such a booming establishment? Nothing much. I was just playing around with Hunyo. Ling Han smiled, and said, does Lady Yen have some business with me? So I can't just come by for a chat if I don't have any business with you? Lady Yen smiled sweetly, her charm on full blast. However, this only gave Ling Han goosebumps. You're already a middle-aged woman in your 40s, and no matter how enchanting and charming you are, you still would not try and make a move on a young man like me, right? He frowned and said, it is not proper for a single man and woman to be together alone. Mr. Ling is really good at making jokes. You and Tian Zhao are brothers, and members of a younger generation than I. How does your theory about a single man and woman make sense, then? Lady Yen said calmly. Then, she giggled, and with a light tremble of her body, she said, Mr. Ling, could it be that you are hiding a beauty in your residence, and fear that I would discover her? She forced herself in, and Ling Han had no way to stop her. A spiritual ocean-tier martial artist was far stronger than he. Hu Niu instantly glared at her, and naturally thought Lady Yen to be an enemy. Ling Han picked Hu Niu up so that the little girl would not be injured by Lady Yen if she actually dared to attack the latter. He followed at Lady Yan's heels, and said, I do indeed have a young girl hidden here. Oh, who is it? Lady Yen asked casually. How could it be anyone but this little girl here? Ling Han laughed. He knew that Lady Yen was already suspicious, which was why she had forced her way in. It was obvious that Yun Shuang was of critical importance to Lady Yen, so much that she could even turn hostile against him for her. This concerned Yen Tianzhao's future prospects. One should never underestimate the maniacal lengths a mother could go to. She could do unimaginable things for the sake of her child. Lady Yen slightly started, and instantly dissolved into a bout of delicate laughter. She did not mind showing off the waves of her body in front of Ling Han, causing Ling Han to feel disgusted. This body was a bit too old for his tastes. He had zero interest in seeing anything at all. Mr. Ling, has Shuang come here previously? She suddenly stopped, turned and asked him. Naturally. Ling Han nodded. Lady Yen invited me over for a banquet a few days ago. Didn't you just send Miss Shuang over with the invitation? Shuang did not come here today? Lady Yen asked, her tone laced with meaning. Ling Han knew that this was the point where they would be laying all their cards out on the table. If he answered no, and Lady Yen managed to find Yun Shuang here, then the relationship between them would naturally be completely shattered. No. Ling Han denied, without sparing even a moment of thought. Though he had always had a heart to sympathize with the weaker party, Ling Han thought that the kind of person who could manipulate the adopted daughter that she herself had taken in such a way was disgraceful. Mr. Ling would not mind if I take a look for myself, right? Lady Yen asked. If I say I mind, would Lady Yen listen to me? Ling Han countered, sighing deeply in his heart. If Guang Yuan had come over today, it would have been good. Lady Yen merely giggled delicately, and began to tour around his courtyard, very quickly arriving at the room that the Lu sisters were staying in. She gave a light push, and when she realized that the doors were locked, a cold smirk curled up the corners of her lips. She suddenly exerted power through her palm, and the latch that kept the doors locked was shattered from the force. A creak resounded, and the doors opened slightly. Lady Yen gave a light push, and the two doors instantly opened wide. Yeah. A girl had been in the process of putting on her clothes, and when she saw the visitor, she hurriedly used her clothing to cover her breasts and asked with alarm, "Who are you?" Lady Yan's eyes swept over her. This was a young girl, and an extremely beautiful one at that, but she looked very different from Yun Shuang. Moreover, she was too familiar with Yun Shuang. Even if the latter had disguised herself, there was no way her eyes would be fooled. This girl was obviously not her. I'd like to request Lady Yen to keep my secret. Ling Han deliberately sighed. Please do not tell Yu Tong. A flash of suspicion passed over Lady Yan's face. Could it be that this girl was Ling Han's little girlfriend, and that was why he had tried repeatedly to stop her from entering? It was as simple as that. However, why did this girl look a little familiar to her? As she thought, she slowly nodded, and said with a smile, "Men are indeed all greedy and lecherous. Yu Tong is the princess of the Lu clan. Treat her well, please do not miss out on such a wonderful relationship." Ling Han merely grinned awkwardly. "I shall not disturb the two of you, then. I still have some matters to attend to, so I shall beg my leave here. If Mr. Ling is free, please do come frequently to the Cherishing Flower Pavilion to play. Tian'er misses you and Yutong very much. Lady Yen turned around and left. I shall escort you. Ling Han turned around and winked at Lu Feng-er, who was inside the room, then escorted Lady Yen out. When they arrived at the doors, Lady Yen abruptly turned around and asked, Mr. Ling, what is the name of that girl just now? I seem to have seen her somewhere before. How could that be? She is just a silly girl who has never seen the world, Ling Han said with a smile. Lady Yen nodded, turned and left. Ling Han closed the door and hurried to the room. At this moment, Lu Ru'er and Yun Shuang had also crawled out from underneath the bed. They had been holding their breath and hanging from the bed frame all along just now, so at this moment, they were panting for breath. Thank goodness the old witch was fooled and left. Lu Ru'er said, patting her chest in relief. Ling Han shook his head, and said, maybe not. Hasn't she already left? Lu Ru'er asked in incomprehension. She has, but she has not let go of all her suspicions, Ling Han said. If it was not for the fact that she did not want to completely turn hostile against me, she would have searched through the whole courtyard just now. However, this will only delay her for a while. He paused, and said to Lu Feng-er, however, your identity has been exposed. I believe that she will quickly recall that you are a wanted criminal. That's impossible. Lu Ru'er shook her head, then said proudly, I deliberately let my sister step out just now. No one has seen her real face before. Are you an idiot? Ling Han said bluntly, and pointed at the mirror. Just take a look at how similar the two of you look like. There would also be some discrepancies with the portrait of the wanted criminal, so the two of you can completely be taken to be the same person. She must have gone to inform the Imperial Guards by now, and before long, the Imperial Guards would arrive to investigate. By that time, the three of you would be found, and her goal would naturally be achieved. Chapter 202, Making a Choice on the Path of Cultivation. Then what do we do now? A hint of worry appeared on the faces of the three girls. Of course, flee. Ling Han waved them off. Immediately, right now, all of you disguise yourselves and leave the Imperial City. How did you know that we know how to disguise ourselves? Lu Ru'er was once again stunned. Ling Han sighed, and looked at her scornfully. Don't forget. I have seen how your sister looks like after she has disguised herself. Oh, right. Lu Ru'er clapped her hands, then looked a bit dejected. She was really so stupid, always being mocked by this guy. Make a move. You all don't have much time left, Ling Han urged. The three girls quickly began disguising themselves. The Lu sisters were professionals in this area. They disguised themselves first before helping Yun Shuang with her disguise. Instantly, they became three young men. What astonished Ling Han was the fact that, somehow, they managed to flatten their breasts and there was a protruding Adam's apple on their necks. They put on Ling Han's clothing, and took with them some cash. Their original clothing, such as their skirts, for example, was burnt to ashes in the courtyard. Young Master Han, thank you. In the future, if I get the chance, Shuang will do everything to repay your great kindness. Yun Shuang thanked him. Ling Han shrugged, and said, if you have not been sold off by the sisters, then we'll talk about it. Pay, we're not human traffickers. Lu Ru'er rolled her eyes. She thought that Ling Han was a really detestable character, always bickering with her. Mr. Ling, we shall meet again. Lu Feng-er curtsied. However, because she currently appeared to be a young man, this movement was extremely weird. Go on. Ling Han waved them off. The three girls left, and soon, there was no sign left of them. Huh, it's finally quiet around here. Ling Han laughed. Actually, this was his real purpose. He had finally chased off 2 freeloaders, so he was very pleased. Yi. Hunyo was also clapping her hands in delight, though she did not know what Ling Han was so happy about. However, Ling Han had not guessed wrongly. After over an hour, a troop of Imperial Guards arrived. Though their tone was polite, and they even apologized for disturbing him, they still insisted to search through Ling Han's courtyard. Naturally, nothing was discovered. They apologetically begged their leave. They had arrived in a rush, and also left in a rush. Ling Han sighed. Looks like he and Lady Yen were firmly on opposing sides. By no, it was not that they had not found the person she was looking for, but that they had not found anyone at all. Since one person could disappear, then, naturally, 2 or even 3 could disappear as well. For the sake of her son, Lady Yen immersed herself in scheming, and could even involve the adopted daughter she had cared for so many years in her plans. What more him? Forget it. I'll just offend her, then. Anyways, I already have many enemies, so it would be of no difference if I have another one. Ling Han lazily stretched. He should go and prepare their meals. Hunyo was already hanging from his neck, and endlessly shouting, "Meat, meat, meat." 3 days passed in the blink of an eye, and Guang Yuan had finally arrived. However, he did not choose to stay in Ling Han's courtyard. Instead, he found another courtyard near to Ling Han's own. Anyways, there were a lot of empty, unoccupied courtyards in this area. With a bodyguard in Spiritual Ocean Tier, Ling Han was naturally much more relaxed. This was real battle prowess. As long as no one in Spiritual Pedestal Tier appeared, there were not many who could defeat Guang Yuan. Moreover, with a bit of guidance from Ling Han, it would be enough for Guang Yuan to become invincible against anyone in Spiritual Ocean Tier. However, Ling Han was not in the mood for this right now. His cultivation rate was too rapid. Now, he had reached the peak period of the 9th layer of Element Gathering Tier. He would have to either break through to Gushing Spring Tier, or he could only stay at this cultivation level, and there would be no further increase to his battle prowess. It was not that he had no way to break through to Gushing Spring Tier. Instead, it was because he was currently faced with a choice. He could still attempt to challenge and break through to the 10th layer of Element Gathering Tier. This was a cultivation level that only existed in legends and theories. At least, as far as Ling Han knew, no one had reached this cultivation level before. Break through the limitation of 9, and capture the 1 of the world, reaching perfection. But was it really possible? In the records of that predecessor, that was only a guess, but it had never been accomplished before. Ling Han considered seriously the probability of success. In his last life, he had already been in Heaven Tier, so naturally he needed not think of this problem as he had long passed this level. However, the current him not only had the comprehension remaining from his last life, he also had the necessary conditions that qualified him to make this attempt, and this was what caused him to hesitate. How high was this possibility? Ling Han tried to deduce the possible results, but still did not come to a conclusion. It could only be claimed that, theoretically, it was indeed possible. However, without being proven in reality, everything was mere empty words. A madness gradually brimmed in his eyes, and he decided to take the gamble. In this life, he was cultivating the indestructible Heaven Scroll. This was an amazing technique, with a grade so high that it could not be estimated. Then, with such a cultivation technique in his hands, should he not ensure that his foundations would be incomparably sturdy and firm? Element Gathering Tier was the second cultivation tier in martial arts. One could say that this was merely the beginning, but it was an extremely important step, as the subsequent 7 tiers would all be derived from this one tier. He decided to take this risk. He began his seclusion to challenge this 10th layer of Element Gathering Tier that perhaps no one had ever managed to reach before. In his dantian, there were 9 big origin nuclei, and 45 smaller origin nuclei that took the shape of a 9-palace array. It was a very stable and subtle arrangement. If he decided to insert another origin nucleus, where should he put it? Ling Han felt a headache coming on. Though he had decided to take the risk and make the attempt, he truly had no idea where to start. How could innovation be anything easy? He had considered many possibilities, but he rejected them all. That was because if he could consider them, then it was natural that his predecessors would have thought of them as well. Even if they themselves had missed out on the chance, how could they not allow their juniors to make the attempt? To successfully complete this step would naturally need him to deviate from the normal path, or even go to extreme lengths or a dead end. Only with that would it be possible for him to be forced into such desperate straits that he had no other way but succeed. Ling Han hesitated once again. If he merely had to follow in the steps of his predecessors, then as long as his foundations were firm, with his immortal grade spirit base and the indestructible heaven scroll, he would definitely advance faster and go further than he had in his last life, so it seemed like there was no need for him to take such a risk. However, his heart and spirit became even more determined. He wanted to become the strongest in this life. His heart and spirit returned to a calm state, and he began to consider a considerable number of strategies on how to proceed with his gamble. There was a large number of possible options that were immediately eliminated by him when he thought of them, and finally, there were only 2 possible methods he could attempt left. The first was to allow the 9 big origin nuclei to repel each other, and create a special space where he would form his 10th origin nucleus. The second was to merge all 9 big origin nuclei into one gigantic origin nucleus. This could also be considered as one and conform to the Tao of the world, becoming the evasive one. In comparison, the second strategy was practically crazy. Thus, Ling Han decided to first attempt the former. He worked hard on allowing the 9 big origin nuclei to repel each other, and create a special space in between them. This step was possible, but the problem was that the 9 big origin nuclei were the source of his energy and power. Now that they were repelling each other, all his energy and power was spent here, so how could he have the extra energy to form the 10th origin nucleus? Ling Han tried a number of ways, but still, there was no way to solve this problem. All of a sudden, 10 days had passed, and he was still back where he had started. Was this method not possible? Ling Han sighed. He had already wasted precious 10 days, so he did not want to and could not continue to delay the matter any longer. He still wanted to break through to Gushing Spring Tier and understand the secrets of the Black Tower. Then, he'd give the second strategy a try. Chapter 203, Merging 9 Nuclei. The second strategy he'd come up with was to destroy and reform. He had to first destroy all 9 big origin nuclei, and form a new gigantic origin nuclei that would become the evasive one. This conformed to the Tao of the world, and was not something he had come up with in the heat of the moment, but he could foresee that putting this into practice would be much more difficult than whatever he could think up of. The 9 big origin nuclei were the source of his power. If he actually shattered them all in one go, then the power created from their simultaneous destruction would be enough to kill him 1,000 times, or 10,000 times, so there was no need for him to even think about forming the evasive one at that point. The reason why Ling Han dared to do this was because there was still Big Boss Black Tower in his Dantian. This Big Boss shattered his physical body in his last life just to have him cultivate the indestructible Heaven Scroll, and then had him seize a new body to be reborn. How great a power was that, and how much of a concern one was that. Now he intended to self-destruct his origin nuclei, so Big Boss Black, are you going to interfere or not? You definitely have to interfere, right? Then everything's settled. Ling Han was a bit shameless, but there was no other way for it. This was the first attempt to break through to the 10th layer of element gathering tier in history, and he did not even know what was the right thing to do to achieve his aim. Thus, he could only depend on the Black Tower. Otherwise, There would only be a millionth of a chance that he would succeed in this attempt, so how could he dare to take the risk? Come on then. He controlled the origin nuclei in his dantian, and began the process of destruction. It was actually very easy to do this, because all the big nuclei were comprised of 5 smaller origin nuclei that had different elemental alignments, and these smaller origin nuclei achieved a balance between them in a wonderful way. He only needed to break this balance, and the 5 elements would go out of control, and naturally, the origin nuclei would self-destruct. Not one by one, but all in one go. Destruction was always easier than construction. Within only an instant, all the origin nuclei began to tremble. The 5 elements both augmented and restrained each other. They began to totter, as if they were the foundations of a tall skyscraper that had suffered heavy damage, and were on the verge of destruction. Hong, hong, hong. The 5 origin nuclei were destroyed one by one. However, their explosion did not spread outwards. Instead, their explosion was concentrated inwards, as if they formed individual black holes. From an extremely big structure, they shrank into extremely small balls. Ling Han's spirit and heart trembled, already feeling the appearance of external power. Black Tower. His consciousness swept over his dantian, and saw the usually calm and ordinary Black Tower was currently emanating a pale light. There was golden writing flickering on the body of the Black Tower, but Ling Han did not even recognize half of a character of this writing, just like when he first encountered the indestructible Heaven Scroll, which required 10,000 years simply to comprehend it. No, 10,000 years was only enough to comprehend the first layer of cultivation technique. One wave of power after another swept out from the Black Tower and acted towards those 45 origin nuclei of his, and it was precisely this power that allowed the explosive power to be concentrated inwards instead of exploding outwards dramatically. Otherwise, his dantian would be completely destroyed in the aftermath. A smile appeared at the corners of Ling Han's lips. Indeed, he had made the right gamble. The Black Tower made its move. He had tried out a lot of things previously, but there was still no reaction from the Black Tower. That was because those attempts would not threaten Ling Han's life or cultivation, so Big Boss Black naturally was too lazy to do anything. But if Ling Han induced the self-destruction of his origin nuclei, then wouldn't that mean the 10,000 years of preparation Big Boss Black had spent would be completely wasted? He hurriedly forced down the distracting thoughts in his head and began to merge the corresponding origin nuclei together. Earth with earth, fire with fire, and so on. Finally, the 45 origin nuclei were reformed into 5 big origin nuclei of different alignments. This still seemed very small, because each origin nuclei was formed from 9 points, and was far from 1/1,000,000th of his most flourishing period, but the power concealed within them was incomparably terrifying. Ling Han's thoughts took a different turn, and he suddenly came up with a strange idea. Could he actually merge these origin nuclei of different elemental alignment into one, to become one origin nuclei, and the only one existing in his dantian? That would conform to the idea of the evasive one. Again, he began to merge the 5 freshly reborn origin nuclei. But the difficulty level of doing that was extremely high. That was because each origin nuclei was formed from 9 smaller origin nuclei, and it was filled with frightening power in the first place. Moreover, the 5 elements were independent of each other. First of all, water and fire was on completely opposing sides, so how could he merge them together? Ling Han stopped and began to ponder. Each element in this world was completely independent of each other. They would of course repel one another if one attempted to merge them together. However, at the same time, the 5 elements augmented and restrained one another, so it was not entirely impossible for them to be merged together. As the saying goes, Tao gave rise to 1, 1 gave rise to 2, 2 gave rise to 3, and 3 gave rise to all things. Everything could return to 1, the source of Tao. However, the world would not allow mere mortals to get hold of the source of Tao, which was how the saying of the evasive one came about. He dared to destroy the 9 origin nuclei and merged them together as one again, and this conformed to the theory of the evasive one. However, these 5 origin nuclei were not the real one, and not the real Tao either. This was based on his understanding of the Tao of martial arts from his last life as a heaven-tier elite. Otherwise, who would dare attempt such a feat? The 5 elements augmented each other, and evolved into all things. Then, if he wanted to return them back to one, he would have to retrace the steps and make use of the fact that the 5 elements also restrained one another. Ling Han's eyes slowly lit up. He knew what he had to do. He had to let the 5 elemental origin nuclei restrain one another, swallow one another, and finally, there would only be one remaining, which would be the one that had been merged from all the 5 elemental origin nuclei. This was again easily said, but when he put it into practice, he needed to ensure that the 5 elemental origin nuclei were in a perfect balance when they swallowed one another. Otherwise, as long as there was the slightest mistake, all his previous efforts would have been for nothing and he would have no way to return to the only evasive one. In short, he could only succeed, but failure was not allowed. It was very challenging, but he liked it. The 5 elements restrained each other. Gold restrained wood, wood restrained earth, earth restrained water, water restrained fire, and fire restrained gold, all at once. The 5 elements mixed chaos. Lotus fluttered, absorbing spiritual qi, which passed through his veins and gathered in his dantian, delivering new energy. Ling Han stimulated the 5 elemental origin nuclei and took the last step. The gold origin nucleus began to swallow the wood origin nucleus, and the wood origin nucleus began to swallow the earth origin nucleus, and finally, the fire origin nucleus swallowed the gold origin nucleus, forming an unbreakable chain. Ling Han's consciousness clearly saw the 5 origin nuclei were all shrinking, and merging slowly together to finally form a new origin nucleus. Gold, wood, water, fire and earth, all the 5 elements were present yet they were united. He succeeded. Ling Han suddenly opened his eyes, and felt that his whole body was sore. He did not even have the energy to stand, as if his body had weakened to extreme levels. However, on the other hand, his spirit was at its highest level in history, and this was a very weird comparison. He opened the door, and gave a light call. When the words came out of his mouth, he realized that his voice had become low and rough, so much that he could barely recognize his own voice. Ling Han. Xiao, Hunyo's ears were too sharp, and she had raced in from outside. With a pang, she crashed into Ling Han's arms. This collision was too powerful, no weaker than an explosion, and Ling Han instantly fell to the ground from the force. Hunyo did not care, and rubbed her small face on him, then said, "Ling Han mean. Not playing with Nyo. Ling Han, if you continued seclusion for a few more days, Hunyo would probably starve to death." Another person walked in, and it was Lu Yutong. She shook her head, and said, "You entered seclusion for a whole month, almost causing her to die of worry." A month? Ling Han was stunned. As he remembered it, only 10 days had passed. Could it be that his merging of the 5 elemental origin nuclei at the end had taken a whole 20 days? No wonder he was so weak. After all, he hadn't eaten and drunk for so many days. "Bring me some fruits. I need to replenish my energy, or I really will die," he said. "You're weird, brat." Guang Yuang heard the commotion and walked in as well. When he looked at Ling Han, it was as if he was looking at a monster. Chapter 204, The 3 Styles of Black Origin. Guang Yuan said, if a normal martial artist in element gathering tier went into seclusion for a whole month, he would have definitely died. But you brat can actually still manage to open your mouth and talk, this is really strange. He directed a burning look at Ling Han, as if he wanted nothing more to dissect Ling Han to launch a full investigation. In truth, Ling Han had eaten in the first 10 days, but he did not have any food in the 20 days after that. Not even he himself had noticed the passage of time. He had merely merged the 5 elemental origin nuclei, and when he came out of seclusion after succeeding, he realized that 20 days had passed. At that time, he was in a very intriguing state, as spiritual qi was his food and helped to maintain his vitality. After a martial artist stepped into flower blossoming tier, he only needed to absorb spiritual qi to survive, as there would be a complete change to his level of being after breaking through to flower blossoming tier and he would not have to depend on food. Previously, he merged together the 5-element origin nuclei to capture that evasive one, and united with the Tao of this world, which was equivalent to having temporarily raised the level of his being to this level, and so he had entered into this state ahead of time. However, now that he was out of that state, he immediately felt hungry and weak. Lu Yutong fetched some fruits, and Ling Han immediately began to eat. He had to first fill his stomach before eating any meat, otherwise, his body would not be able to take it. Guang Yuan stared at Ling Han. He kept feeling that something was off. He suddenly clapped his hands, then exclaimed, "That's right, why has your cultivation fallen back to the first layer of element gathering tier? Previously, this brat was obviously in the 9th layer of element gathering tier. When a martial artist went into seclusion, that was for the purpose of breaking through to a higher cultivation level. However, even if the attempt failed, the cultivation level should not regress even a bit, what more all the way from the 9th layer to the 1st. This was practically unheard of. In the whole world of martial arts, what other person could do that? Lu Yutong became worried. She looked at Ling Han closely, and indeed sensed from the aura emanating from Ling Han's dantian that there was only one origin nucleus there. She instantly paled, but when she thought about the fact that Ling Han would definitely feel worse than her, she hurriedly comforted him, "It's all right. With your cultivation rate, it would only take 2 to 3 months for you to return to the 9th layer." Ling Han smiled slightly. He naturally knew his own situation. Though there was indeed only one origin nucleus in his dantian, he was a few times stronger than when he was in the 9th layer of element gathering tier. However, he did not explain as this issue involved too much. Moreover, it was likely no one would believe him even if he did. That's not right. Guang Yuan was flustered as his eyes stared at Ling Han's dantian in concentration, and he said, "You are obviously only in the 1st layer of element gathering tier, but why is that I get such a powerful feeling from you, as if I am facing someone in the 1st layer of gushing spring tier?" The 1st layer of element gathering tier could compare to the 1st layer of gushing spring tier? If he actually said this in public, he would definitely be smacked, as others would think that he was muddled from too much drinking and would attempt to sober him. However, Ling Han nodded internally. Spiritual ocean tier was spiritual ocean tier, after all. His eyes were indeed much sharper. Ha ha ha, how could that be? My eyes must have got blurred. Guang Yuan laughed loudly, as he smacked his own head. Pooh! Ling Han almost choked. He had just praised Guang Yuan for having sharp eyes when this guy immediately smacked his praise back into his face. Right, there's a silly brat that came over to look for you a few days ago. He said something about having accomplished the promise of a month. He has to go do something, then he will return to listen to your commands, Guang Yuan said. Oh, that should be Zhu Wujiu. He has broken through to gushing spring tier. He said he was going to go do something. Then, he must have definitely gone to challenge Nangong Ji to a battle. He was indeed a loyal man. Ling Han nodded internally. If it was not for the fact that Zhu Wujiu had this kind of personality, the most he would have done was pass on the cultivation technique of the Silver Moon race to him, and not allow him to stay by his side. How could it be possible that anyone random could have the chance to stay by his side and be commanded by him? After eating some more fruit, Ling Han managed to regain some energy. After a while, he began to eat a full meal. Hunyo did not mind accompanying him in eating. As a result, she ate 10 times more than what he had eaten, and this was merely what the little girl did casually to accompany him for the meal. Ling Han excused himself, saying he intended to go to cultivate. He went alone into the small forest outside. He wanted to do a full evaluation of his current power. He concentrated his origin power in his fist, and when he had reached the limit, he suddenly punched out. The power of his punch burst out, and it actually became a solid fist that was the size of a human fist that flew forwards. Pang, pang, pang. In front of him, over 10 big trees were toppled by the attack, creating a plume of dust as they crashed onto the ground. Ling Han drew back his fist, a hint of satisfaction on his face. The strength of this punch was indeed comparable to the attack of a martial artist in the early period of the first layer of Gushing Spring Tier, as if the 10th layer of Element Gathering Tier was the first layer of Gushing Spring Tier. Breaking through from the Element Gathering Tier to the Gushing Spring Tier is a solid leap in strength. There would at least be a 10-fold increase in strength. Then, by the time that I truly break through to Gushing Spring Tier, my strength should be able to compare to the 6th or 7th layer. What more battle prowess? The higher the cultivation level, the more difficult it is to challenge an opponent in a higher cultivation level. However, after merging the origin nuclei, my ability to challenge someone stronger than me has instead increased. When I was in the first layer of Element Gathering Tier, I only had about 5 to 6 stars of battle prowess. With the support of such great strength, then wouldn't I be able to begin cultivating a black-grade martial arts technique? Ling Han was moved. If he was able to use black-grade martial arts techniques at this point, then this would be a terrifying increase to his battle prowess. Let's give it a try. He flipped through the contents of his memories, looking for a cultivation technique that was suited to him. However, because he was aligned to all 5 elements, aside from lightning element martial arts techniques, he could actually use any kind of martial arts techniques. Thus, there was a large variety of choices available to him. Then, I'll use this one. 3 styles of black origin. This is a sword technique that guy, the Sword Emperor, has used before. According to rumors, it was precisely when he pondered this sword technique that he came to form Sword Ray. When he came begging me for alchemical pills, I asked for this sword technique in exchange. It was only something I did on impulse at the time, but I never thought that I would truly make good use of it. He sat down in a cross-legged position and began to analyze this sword technique in his head. This was a black-grade high-level martial arts technique. However, there were also superior and inferior martial arts techniques even if they were all in black-grade high-level. Some were so powerful they were actually close to Earth grade. If there was a rank from 1 to 10 points to grade the martial arts techniques, then the majority of black-grade high-level martial techniques would be ranked below 5 points, while occasionally there would be a few that were worth 6 or 7 points. However, the black origin sword technique was worth 10 points. This was merely a small step away from Earth-grade martial arts techniques. It could be claimed as the strongest technique for anyone who had yet to reach spiritual pedestal tier. However, the words were complicated, and very difficult to understand. Thankfully, though Ling Han was only in element gathering tier, with regards to comprehension of martial arts, he was indeed in heaven tier. Perhaps it would still be a bit difficult for him to comprehend heaven-grade martial arts techniques, but earth-grade martial arts techniques were naturally a piece of cake to him, what more when this technique was merely close to earth-grade. First style, Mysterious 3000. Ling Han brandished his sword. His movement was obviously very rough, and did not have much force behind it. In fact, it was a bit staggering from side to side. If anyone had seen this, they would likely have fallen down in laughter. The Sword Emperor was indeed a maniac. To actually learn this sword technique when he was only in element gathering tier, he cursed internally. Even with his comprehension abilities of heaven tier, it was still a bit straining for him to cultivate this sword technique, which showed how much of a monster the Sword Emperor was. But he was also overthinking could the Sword Emperor have mastered this sword technique in a mere day? Ling Han endlessly brandished his sword, and his sword technique became smoother and smoother. After all, this was still an ultimate elite of heaven tier who was practicing the sword technique. It would be stranger if this was not the result. Xiao, xiao, xiao. He waved his sword, and a burst of origin power shot out, combining with the spiritual qi of the surroundings, and actually transformed into a few dozen sharp swords that flew forwards in an attack. Pang! The ground whined and shook, and the trees in front of him collapsed in patches. Ling Han was dumbstruck. What a terrifying sword technique! Chapter 205, Strong Enough to Defy the Natural Order. Awesome! Really awesome! Ling Han kept nodding. According to what's depicted on the sword technique, one could be considered as having reached the state of major accomplishment when one can produce a 3,000 blade rain with one wave. One wave from me and I managed to produce a few dozen blades in my attack, which means I have reached around 1% of that level. Still, this power, every blade in the blade rain would be equivalent to a full force attack from me. Even if it was me standing against such an attack, I would only be able to block this attack by transforming the blood-sucking origin gold into a shield. Otherwise, there would be no way to disperse this attack. Merely with this one style, as long as I too have broken through to gushing spring tier, then I would be able to defeat Feng Yen in an instant. However, that guy should still have hidden cards up his sleeve, so it would not be easy to kill him. Additionally, this style of the sword technique expends too much origin power. One wave of the sword is equivalent to producing a few dozen full force attacks. If it was not for the fact that the space in my dantian had expanded by more or less 100-fold, I would not be able to bear such an expense of origin power. The Sword Emperor is indeed a maniac. This guy must also have swallowed a spatial pill when he was young. Otherwise, even if he was in gushing spring tier, he would not be able to keep up such heavy use of his origin power either. And now that I think about it, in my last life, aside from the Sword Emperor, the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden also had control over endless Yi fires, so she probably must have fused with a strange fire, perhaps even more than one. The Setting Sun Saber Emperor obtained a treasured saber forged from blood-sucking origin gold, and was similarly terrifying in power. And there's also Ma Wei Yang, Zhishuxian, and Na Lan Tuesday. These three were not simple characters either. They also seemed to have their own secret weapons, and I was the only one with the weakest battle prowess amongst all of them. When I recall it now, they must have come from extremely powerful backgrounds, which was what allowed them to reach heaven tier at such a young age. I was the only one who depended on the effects of the alchemical pills I concocted, and managed to reach heaven tier even though I began later than them, and soon surpassed them by a wide margin. This land seems to be a much deeper pond than what I had thought at first. Never mind. 10,000 years has already passed, and all those guys should have become dust by now, so there's no point thinking about it any longer. Ling Han recovered his origin power, and began to cultivate the second style of Black Origin Sword Technique 10,000 techniques return to 1. This was a powerful move, and required a certain time period to gather enough power for it. It was as if the user collected the power used in 10,000 attacks and combined them to form a single strike. After Ling Han obtained the Black Origin Sword Technique in his last life, he merely looked it over roughly because he did not have any intention to cultivate this sword technique at all, and thus naturally did not take it to heart. However, now that he had begun practicing it, he could not help but pale. Was this really a black-grade martial arts technique? One style produced 3,000 full-force attacks all at once, while another combined the force behind 10,000 attacks into a single strike. The force in these two styles was definitely crazily powerful. Putting aside Earth grade, not even Heaven grade martial arts techniques would be this awesome. How could this be? If it was in Earth grade or Heaven grade, then how could he manage to cultivate it at this point in time? Martial artists in body refining and element gathering tier could only cultivate yellow-grade martial arts techniques, whereas martial artists in gushing spring and spiritual ocean tiers could advance one step further and cultivate black-grade martial arts techniques. Spiritual pedestal tier would mean another step further, being able to cultivate earth-grade martial arts techniques. And only when one cast off his mortal body and broke through to flower-blossoming tier would one meet the requirements to peep into heaven-grade martial arts techniques. Since that was the case, then it should not be possible for him to cultivate earth-grade martial arts techniques now, what more heaven-grade. However, he had been in heaven tier in his last life, so he clearly knew the power of earth-grade and heaven-grade martial arts techniques. Thus, he was naturally able to judge that the power of the three styles of black origin definitely did not place it in the black-grade category. When Ling Han thought back, it was no wonder the Sword Emperor had such an ugly expression as if his parents had died when he handed over this technique. He had at first thought that the Sword Emperor would not care about a black-grade sword technique when he was already that powerful. He had never imagined these three styles of sword technique would be so terrifying. Then, what about the third style? Ling Han did not continue to cultivate 10,000 techniques returned to one. Instead, he worked hard to analyze the third style. Then, he experienced a great shock. The third style was called breaking limits, and the amount of origin power required for this move could practically fill an ocean. According to his calculations, even when he had broken through to spiritual ocean tier, he would still need at least a few hours to gather enough power to be able to perform this last style. This was definitely not used to battle your enemies. A scene appeared in Ling Han's mind. A magnificently powerful elite warrior was faced against a gigantic protective array. He raised his sword and, after a very long time, brandished it in a strike. A flash of light from the blade washed over, and the giant array was destroyed. That's right. Breaking limits was used to slice open protective arrays. In front of such a powerful technique, even an ancient giant array could possibly be destroyed, and it would directly kill off the living beings hidden behind this protective array. This style of sword technique could no longer be judged according to grade. Ling Han supported his chin with his hands, and a pensive expression appeared on his face. In his last life, he had never battled with the other 6 heaven-tier elites, because he knew that his cultivation level had merely advanced through swallowing alchemical pills. His battle prowess was also the weakest and least solid of all of them, so he would naturally not bother seeking his own humiliation. However, the other 6 would frequently battle each other, all competing for the position of the strongest. Even though Nalan Tu, Ji Shuxian, and Ma Wei Yang were always ranked below the top 3, they were still able to exchange blows with the Sword Emperor and not die, or even get serious injuries out of it. Now that he thought about it, they were practically terrifying people. What kind of monsters were those 6? Ling Han could not help but want to go mad. In his last life, after he had reached heaven tier, he had spent the majority of his time on searching for a way to break through to shattering void tier. Otherwise, if he had gone to investigate the secrets of those 6, he would not be at a loss like this now. From the broken shards of memory of the blood-sucking origin gold, a terrifyingly prosperous period of martial arts could be seen. And a few dozen years or a few hundred years after my death, there once again appeared heaven-tier elites by the hundred on this land. This means that I had yet to really grasp all knowledge and understanding of this world. Moreover, there is still such a divine object like the Black Tower, and the little girl's spirit base is also a very shocking existence. Interesting. Interesting. Ling Han stood up, and once again began to cultivate 10,000 techniques returned to one. This was a powerful technique that could be used to battle one's enemies. If he was actually given enough time to accumulate the power necessary for this style, then no matter how many trump cards Feng Yen had hidden up his sleeve, he still had the confidence he would be able to kill the latter with a wave of his sword. This consumed too much origin power. Only after a while, Ling Han again sat down and had to swallow a few pills and absorb spiritual qi to replenish his energy. Sword Emperor, Sword Emperor, though you're long dead, but if your sect still existed, I would be interested to take a look around there. What kind of place could the Heaven Sword sect be, to actually possess such a terrifying martial arts technique? He practiced for a while, then stopped to rest, then began practicing again, and very soon, the day passed. Ling Han was still mostly concentrating his efforts on advancing to a higher cultivation level now. Only when he broke through to Gushing Spring Tier would he be able to understand the secrets of the Black Tower. Thankfully, this would only require about half a month's time. That's right, though he was only left with one gigantic origin nucleus, the time needed to strengthen this origin nucleus as far as it could go was threefold the time he had spent previously. On the next day, Lu Yutong once again gracefully arrived. Let me tell you a piece of good news. Feng Yan has left the academy. It seems he's gone to ask for some kind of spiritual medicine that will allow Feng Luo's arms to be as good as new, she said. Ling Han was dumbfounded. Could this Feng Luo really be born in the year of the cockroach or something like that? In the past, he thrashed and smacked him so much that he had even lost his whole mouth of teeth. However, not long after, he would go back to acting all high and mighty. Now, he had even chopped off his arms, and Feng Luo still had the chance to recover. Fuck. Has his arms been reattached now? They were reattached, but they're not very nimble. There is no way for him to exert any strength through his arms, and that's why Feng Yan has gone off to seek a spiritual medicine to help him recover, Lu Yutong said. This was indeed a very dutiful elder brother. Peng, peng, peng. A knocking was heard from the doors, and Hunyou ran over to open them. Soon, she came back leading a person behind her. It was Zhu Wujiu. I broke through to Gushing Spring Tier 7 days ago, and fulfilled the promise I made with you. However, from the looks of things now, I am not able to become your follower. I can only repay you in my next life. Zhu Wujiu said. Why? Ling Han asked. I sought Nangong Ji out for a challenge and crippled his Dantian. Soon, the academy will have me captured. Even if I am not sentenced to death, my cultivation will still be crippled. Zhu Wujiu said calmly, no hint of fear or regret on his face at all. Chapter 206, Arrest. Ling Han laughed, and said, just a small thing like that? A small thing like that? Putting aside the issue of Nangong Ji's identity, the rules of the academy clearly stated that spars were acceptable, but crippling injuries and deadly attacks were strictly forbidden. Anyone who broke the rules would be harshly punished. Additionally, there was the issue of Nangong Ji's identity. He was the young master of a middle-class clan, and furthermore had an elder brother who was a true disciple. How could the Nangong clan simply let the matter go? Zhu Wujiu was a very solitary character. Anyways, he was all alone with no family. If they wanted his life, they were free to claim it. Either way, he had already crippled Nangong Ji. For a martial artist, crippling his cultivation was no better than killing him directly, especially in those bigger clans. The status of a crippled martial artist would fall dramatically in his own clan, and anyone was free to come over and give him another kick while he was down. That strong disparity in his treatment would be enough to cause anyone to commit suicide. Obviously, Zhu Wujiu had the ability to kill Nangong Ji. Yet he had only crippled the latter's cultivation to allow Nangong Ji to experience that colossal disparity, and give him a worse punishment. Just stay here for now, and I'll see who dares to come capture you, Ling Han said calmly. What a boastful tone. When the people sent from the discipline committee of the academy arrived, would you really dare to jump out? So what if you did dare to jump out? For a mere martial artist in element gathering tier, wasn't that merely overrating yourself and attempting to do the impossible? But when he thought about it, Ling Han was well-intentioned, so Zhu Wujiu nodded, and said, "Thank you, but I was the one who caused this trouble, so I will definitely not drag you into it." Ling Han merely smiled. If he continued to say anything more, it was likely Zhu Wujiu would think that he was bragging. He had no intention to be looked down upon by a descendant of the Silver Moon race. "Brat, a lot of people are here." Guang Yuan arrived in a leap. He had heard the commotion and recalled the fact that he was now Ling Han's bodyguard, and so naturally came to inform him and stood on one side to watch. "They're here to arrest me," Zhu Wujiu said calmly. He had already fulfilled his heart's desire, so he was absolutely unconcerned about whether he lived or died anymore. "That's right. Here to capture you." A group of 10 walked in. The one in the lead was a young man who looked to be in his mid-20s, and there was arrogance and rage in his expression. The captain of Team 4 of the Discipline Committee, Nangong Xing. He was also Nangong Ji's elder brother, and in the third layer of Gushing Spring tier. He was of course furious. Zhu Wujiu actually dared to cripple his younger brother's dantian. This was a challenge to the authority of the Nangong clan and also a harsh slap to his face, making him feel the urge to commit murder. "Since you already know, are you not going to submit yourself to be arrested?" Nangong Xing asked coldly. He threw a challenging look at Ling Han. He was naturally defiant. A mere minor character in element gathering tier was actually able to cause waves in the academy and become a famous person in Huyang Academy. Also, according to rumors, even the two extreme beauties, Lu Yutong and Li Si Chan, were close to him. His eyes had turned red from feeling extreme jealousy. In his eyes, Ling Han had merely gotten a bout of asterisk good fortune, and had merely obtained the prestige he had now because of Feng Yan. Moreover, if it was not the fact that he was so extremely fortunate and was rescued by the headmaster of the alchemy department who had so coincidentally happened to pass by, this guy would have long been torn to pieces by Feng Yan. He looked at Ling Han, and a cold smile appeared on his lips as he said, "Ling Han, are you going to cover for this criminal?" "This has nothing to do with Ling Han." Zhu Wujiu stepped out. It was because of Ling Han's help that he had managed to surpass Nangong Ji's cultivation level and get his vengeance. It was already enough that he could not repay Ling Han's kindness, so how could he allow Ling Han to be dragged down by him into this matter? "You're sensible." Nangong Xing humphed. If Ling Han dared to show off at this time, he would not mind arresting one more person. "Aren't you very mighty? Then I'll arrest you and go one round in the academy, and let's see if you still have any face left to see anyone. Apprehend him and drag him back." Nangong Xing waved his hand. Immediately, 2 people walked towards Zhu Wujiu. One of them had a chain in his hands. This was forged from black blood iron. Once a person was chained by this chain, then even an elite of spiritual ocean tier would not be able to escape. "Hold on." Ling Han stepped out and stretched out a hand to block their advance. He said, "This is one of mine. You people want to capture him, but have you gotten my approval yet?" "Ha ha ha." Nangong Xing was delighted. Ling Han actually wanted to interfere, then that was great. He was just being troubled over having no excuse to do anything to Ling Han, and this brat actually delivered himself to be stamped on. "Ling Han, how dare you," he shouted in rebuke. "This is a criminal that the academy has commanded to be arrested." "Wrong." Ling Han held up a finger and waved it from left to right. "Whether it is a crime or not, he should still undergo a trial to be judged. Yet you keep saying, criminal, here and there. Does that mean you're above the academy? From how I look at it, you're the one who is extremely bold." Nangong Xing could not help but be at a loss for words. Then, he said in anger and embarrassment, "Ling Han, you are merely twisting the facts. I am commanded to make the arrest, and if you dare to interfere, I will apprehend you as well. He. If anyone dares to touch one of my people, I would not mind breaking his legs. Ling Han's eyes swept over the whole group, and he grinned. If you're not scared, you all can give it a try, but don't say I didn't warn you. The expressions on the members of the discipline committee all changed. When they thought about how he had sliced off Feng Luo's arms, according to the academy regulations, this was a crime in no way lighter than Zhu Wujiao crippling Nangong Ji's cultivation. But this guy was still completely safe and unharmed. Even Feng Yan, who was very influential at this time, seemed to be unable to do anything against him, so no one dared to think of his threats as mere empty words. When he saw the fearful expressions of his subordinates, Nangong Xing could not help but feel enraged and humiliated, and said, "This is the Huyang Academy, who would dare to be above the academy?" When they heard these words, quite a number of people rolled their eyes secretly. There were indeed none who dared in the past. But just some time ago, Feng Luo had already broken the rules, and expelled Li Hao for no reason whatsoever. Then, Ling Han, who had sliced off Feng Luo's arms, was not punished at all. When one now talked about the academy rules, it was always with a tone of sarcasm. "Young Master Han, I don't want to involve you," Zhu Wujiao said as he turned back to face Ling Han. He would accept Ling Han's good intentions, but could not bear to have him dragged into this matter for his sake. "Nonsense. If you want to battle to death for my sake in future, there would be a lot of opportunities for you to do so. But now, be quiet and stand behind me obediently." Ling Han waved him off, and turned to look at Nangong Xing. "I do not welcome outsiders here. Would you like to leave on your own, or would you like me to toss you all out?" "Ling Han, don't be so conceited." Nangong Xing strode forwards, and his sword left its sheath. He stared at Ling Han for a moment, then said with a smirk, "You've gone mad from cultivation, haven't you? Your cultivation actually dropped to the first layer of element gathering tier? With such little ability, you still dare to be so insolent in front of me? Just you watch as I force you all into submission with a single move." Zhu Wujiao gritted his teeth and stepped in front of Ling Han. He also drew his sword, and said, "Nangong Xing, I can go with you. This matter has nothing to do with young Master Han. Don't force me to make a move." Nangong Xing hesitated slightly. Zhu Wujiao was also in gushing spring tier. Though his ability was beneath his own, but if he really forced the former into desperate straits, then even if he managed to apprehend him successfully, he would have to pay a heavy price. He was only jealous of Ling Han, which was why he wanted to embarrass him, but if the price for such an act was that he would suffer heavy injuries? He was not as foolish as that. "All right." He nodded. "Little Jiojio, when did it start that you were the one to make decisions around here? Just stand at one side." Ling Han clapped a hand onto Zhu Wujiao's shoulder and pulled him back. His characteristic of covering for his own people was fully activated. He waved Nangong Xing off, and said, "Get lost quickly. Don't say I'm bullying you. Find someone stronger." "Fuck." Nangong Xing was so angry his whole face was twisted. Chapter 207, Blind. He was merely in the first layer of element gathering, and actually dared to be so arrogant? Did he think that just because he had exchanged a few moves with Feng Yan, he was already in gushing spring tier? Nangong Xing did not believe that in the slightest. He only thought it was merely those who had witnessed the scene had exaggerated what they had seen, and the rumors had increasingly distorted the truth, which had led to such a preposterous idea. Element gathering tier managing to oppose gushing spring tier? Pay. Nangong Xing said icily, "Since that is the case, then don't blame me for being forceful. You are protecting a criminal that the Academy has issued a warrant for, so your crime is the same. I am the captain of Team 4 of the Discipline Committee, and am under the command to make the arrest. If anyone dares to stop me, I have the special privilege to kill all in my way." Lu Yutong stepped out. She thought that Ling Han had failed in his attempt to break through and his cultivation level had regressed back to the first layer of element gathering tier, so how could she simply watch as Ling Han went to battle against an elite martial artist in the third layer of gushing spring tier? Ling Han laughed, and pulled her to one side. He said with a smile, "Didn't you see that even Big Brother Guang did not step out? What are you in such a rush for? I can easily take care of such a minor character." "That's right. You can just hand over such a minor character to the brat," Guang Yuan said casually. "There's something a little strange about this brat, no, something very strange." He kept feeling that there was something off about Ling Han. Though he did indeed only have one origin nucleus, but for some reason, the feeling he sensed from Ling Han had far surpassed element gathering tier. Hearing him say so, Lu Yutong finally calmed down slightly and obediently stepped to one side. She believed that with a powerful martial artist in spiritual ocean tier here, even if Ling Han did come to be in any danger, Guang Yuan would still be able to save him in time. Zhu Wujiu had still kept his head raised high. One should be responsible for what he had done. Yet he was once again flung to one side with a smack from Ling Han, and stared at Ling Han sullenly. "An underling like you is really blind. Can't you see that I'm going to show off my might? Do you want to snatch a chance to show off like this from me? Just look at Big Brother Guang Yuan, he's much smarter," Ling Han berated jokingly. "Pay!" Guang Yuan immediately spat in scorn. He only felt it was beneath him to make a move. A junior merely in the third layer of gushing spring tier, one finger from him would be enough to force him into submission. But from Ling Han's words, this lack of action from him was supposedly him being obedient, making him irritated. "Are you done with your chit-chat?" Nangong Xing asked through his gritted teeth. This was the Huyang Academy and the Discipline Committee had the highest authority here, yet these two people actually dared to banter and joke around in front of him. That was disregarding and disrespecting him too much, wasn't it? "Are you in such a rush to get thrashed? All right, come on then." Ling Han crooked his finger. "Ling Han, this had nothing to do with you in the first place," Nangong Xing said darkly. "But you are the one who insists on being such a busybody. People like you usually die very quickly. Is that any of your business?" Ling Han gave him the middle finger. "Fuck." Nangong Xing could not hold himself back anymore. He suddenly leaped forwards and struck with a stab. The cold light of the sword flickered like lightning, shooting towards Ling Han's chest. Ling Han smiled calmly. He gave a casual grab, and it was as if Nangong Xing was cooperating with him as the blade of his sword was successfully caught in Ling Han's hand. Everyone was astonished. With Nangong Xing's ability in the third layer of gushing spring tier, his sword should be like a lightning strike. Ling Han should not be able to even see its trajectory, what more grab it with his bare hand. However, what use was there for him to grab onto it? The power of the third layer of gushing spring tier was instilled into the sword, and he only needed to give it a light tremble and he would be able to slice off Ling Han's fingers. "You are looking for death." Indeed, Nangong Xing humphed coldly, and was just about to twist his sword. But his expression immediately changed, because it was as if the sword in his hand was firmly rooted in Ling Han's hand. No matter how much strength he used, it did not move in the slightest. How could that be? He was merely in the first layer of element gathering tier, how could he possibly have such terrifying strength? Ling Han smiled calmly, and said, "Let me give you a warning. Let go of your sword to avoid a little bit of suffering. If the sword exists, so does the swordsman. If the sword dies, so does the ah." Nangong Xing was still trying to be brave and say a few beautiful words when he suddenly released a shrill scream, and hurriedly let go. There was actually a patch of bright red on his palm visible, as if he had burnt his palm. This was because Ling Han had made use of his strange fire, and had transmitted the high heat through the blade. Thankfully, it had passed through the blade. Otherwise, if he was directly burnt by the strange fire, his whole palm may be burnt into charcoal. Nangong Xing glanced around, and everyone was looking at him strangely, causing him to flush uncontrollably. He stared at Ling Han, and asked, "Ling Han, do you insist on shielding this person? Is there something wrong with your ability to understand? He is my lackey, and is under my protection. If you want to challenge him, I will not interfere. But if you intend to use some kind of unjust means to bully my lackey, then don't blame me for being aggressive." Ling Han said. "This person has crippled my brother. Should he not be punished by the academy?" Nangong Xing said sharply. "That only means that your brother got his just desserts. I believe that you yourself should be aware of the enmity between him and Nangong Ji. If you want to get your revenge, that's fine. Zhu Wujiao can accept your challenge. Yet you want to use your connections as an intimidation tactic? Get lost." Ling Han said coldly. "Ling Han, what you're doing now is opposing the Huyang Academy." Nangong Xing spat out word by word, his face ashen. Ling Han shrugged, and said, "So what if I am? Anyways, even if more elites come, there would still be Big Brother Guang here. Hey, hey, hey. When did I say I wanted to help you oppose the elites of Huyang Academy?" Guang Yuan waved his hands hurriedly. Big Brother Guang Yuan is really modest. Isn't it just a small matter of stretching out a hand for you? Ling Han said with a smile. However, Guang Yuan kept shaking his head in refusal. The Huyang Academy had powerful martial artists of spiritual pedestal tier in their ranks. Only if he had gone crazy would he dare to step out to oppose this kind of existence. Yet Nangong Xing still knew that he was not able to apprehend Zhu Wujiao at this moment, so he said hatefully, "This matter will not be settled so easily. Ling Han, even if the academy does not pursue the matter, my Nangong clan will not give up." "Are you threatening me?" Ling Han's eyes frosted over. "So what if I am? The thing I hate most is being threatened." Ling Han walked towards Nangong Xing. "Against such people, my usual procedure is to thrash them till they submit. You may be too confident in yourself." Nangong Xing smirked. "I don't know what means you used just now, but after I have experienced a loss, I will not fall to the same trick a second time. Is that right?" Ling Han drew his sword. He could take advantage of this chance to try out the power of the Black Origin sword technique. Hopefully, he could control his power and avoid crippling Nangong Xing with a single strike. "Give me a sword." Nangong Xing stretched out a hand to one side, and immediately someone drew his own sword and handed it over to him. With a flourish of the sword, he said, "Then let me show you the might of the Seven Wonder Sword technique of my Nangong clan." Ling Han laughed, and held his sword level. The tip of the blade was slightly lowered, and suddenly, one wave of power after another spread out from the tip, as if a pebble had been cast into a lake, creating ripples. The wave spread out, and Guang Yuan, who had been wearing an absent-minded expression, immediately became solemn. Then his expression changed dramatically, and he looked extremely shocked. He had not seen the real might of this sword technique yet, but just looking at the stance, he experienced the feeling as if a storm was coming. If this technique was used, it would definitely be earth-shattering and incomparably terrifying. What kind of sword technique could this be, and how could it actually appear in the hands of a martial artist in element gathering tier? A layer of cold sweat immediately appeared on Nangong Xing's face, and beads of sweat continuously dripped down his face. His body was trembling, as if he was about to fall apart. Chapter 208, Ken Yi. Reverie _ The opponent was already subdued without unleashing the attack. Nangong Xing didn't dare to move a single bit. He felt as though if he were to move slightly, it would incite an attack like a thunderstorm from his opponent, and he definitely wouldn't be able to block it. This perception of it made him completely hopeless. His opponent was only a mere element-gathering tier, but how could he pressure him so utterly? Ling Han unleashed his sword with a slash. 9 swords made of origin energy shot up into the air like the rising sun, radiating and harsh to the eyes. Nangong Xing's body was instantly struck flying and he fell onto the ground with a thud, blood oozing out from his chest. Guang Yuan's eyes opened wide, clearly saw the strike this time. Ling Han's attack sent out 9 sword lights, and each sword light condensed from spiritual qi into a sword of origin energy. This was a bit surprising, but it wasn't unacceptable. What was surprising was that the power of each sword of origin power reached the level of Ling Han's full-strength attack. In other words, in that instant, it was equivalent to 9 Ling Hans attacking Nangong Xing. How could Nangong Xing block it? He couldn't help but think, if it were him, how would he fend off this attack? The answer surprised him. Could only rely on power that far surpassed Ling Han's and send Ling Han flying with attacks covering a large area so as to avoid confronting the attack head-on. In short, at the same tier, he wouldn't be able to block this strike. How could it be so terrifying? Cough. Cough. Nangong Xing fell onto the ground, spitting out blood continuously. Ling Han already held back in his attack, but it still heavily injured him. The others were speechless. Was this really the cultivation of first layer of the element-gathering tier? The first layer of the element-gathering tier could be this fierce? Ling Han sheathed his sword, and said dismissively, "Take him away, don't let him lie here like an eyesore." Nangong Xing let out a hacking cough, and another mouthful of fresh blood came out. So he didn't even count as an opponent in Ling Han's eyes. As he was carried away by the masses, his gaze was fixed on Ling Han. This definitely won't be over so easily, it definitely won't. Young Master Han, Zhu Wujiu didn't know what to say. Although he was moved that Ling Han shielded him, he saw it as pointless. How could an element-gathering tier martial artist go against Huyang Academy? He certainly disobeyed the Academy's rules. If you exploited your strength to act violently, then I obviously wouldn't help you. Ling Han looked at him and continued in a dignified tone, but Nangong Ji deserved to be punished, so I support you on this case. Zhu Wujiu grit his teeth. If the Academy sought someone to blame, he would definitely take on all the charges, and not involve Ling Han. Guang Yuan watched in amusement. According to his previous impression, Ling Han was just a nouveau riche that brandished money to such extreme degrees that earth and water faction could only lower their head. Now, it appeared that this guy was also hot-headed, daring to confront Huyang Academy head-on. Could earth and water faction even compare to Huyang Academy? However, this guy seemed to also have a strong network. Even the Imperial Guards had to give him face. It was not as though he were completely reckless. He couldn't help but let out a smile. This youngster was interesting, and he wanted to see how Ling Han would handle things hereafter. Ling Han suddenly turned his head and looked far away. A youngster approached, his left shoulder empty, obviously missing a limb. In Huyang Academy, there were only 2 people who had lost their left arm, Feng Luo and Can Yi. However, Feng Luo was missing his right arm. The person here still had a perfectly fine right arm, so there was only one possibility. One of Huyang Academy's 3 great core disciples, Can Yi, who Lian Guangzhu personally instructed. Teacher and master, that was a completely different concept. Teachers took the academy's salary, instructed the students' cultivation, and taught what was universal to the academy. What about a master? It was one who imparted with great care their entire life's leanings. The intimacy of such a relationship was like that of father and son. Lian Guangzhu had only one disciple, and that was Can Yi, a crippled youngster. Can Yi approached slowly, carrying a long saber on his back. His gaze was sharp like an exceptional saber unsheathed, which gave the feeling that even if a large mountain blocked his path, he would be able to split it open. He has the presence of a master. Guang Yuan said surprisingly. Ken Ye's cultivation level was not worth mentioning, but that presence somewhat moved him. Ling Han also nodded. He was optimistic about this youngster who had the potential to become a saber master. This feeling was something he felt from Sword Emperor and Twilight Saber Emperor. But Ken Ye was still too inexperienced, showing only the first signs of such a possibility. That attack just now, it's strong. Ken Ye looked at Ling Han with an intense urge to fight. You want to spar? Ling Han broke into a wide grin. This guy's not bad. He already had the thought of taking him under his wing. Ken Ye pondered, then said, against that move, I'm only 10% confident of neutralizing it. He paused, and then said, if I study the method of neutralization by pondering it for 3 days, would have the assurance of 30%. He was quite honest. Then let us battle 3 days later? Ling Han said with a smile. Ken Ye shook his head, and said, your cultivation level is too weak, I can split you in two with one strike, you simply have no chance to unleash your sword. This was quite honest, but too honest that it was uncomfortable to hear. Ling Han laughed mischievously, then said, let's make a bet. Bet what? Ken Ye asked. Let's fight, and if you can't beat me, then you'll be my sidekick, Ling Han said. You won't suffice as my opponent, you're only going to be cut down by a single slash, Ken Ye said coldly but with surety, emotionless like a saber. That may not be. Ling Han laughed. Let's fight, and if I get killed by you, then that's my fate, if I don't die, then you'll be my sidekick. Ken Ye made him think of Twilight Saber Emperor. Perhaps, one day, this guy really might become the second Saber Emperor. Ken Ye pondered it, then said, whenever I attack, I never hold back, and you really will die. I'm not afraid of death, so what are you afraid of? Ling Han cracked a smile. Come, and submit as my sidekick. Ken Ye looked confusedly at Ling Han. No matter how he looked, his opponent had no sliver of a chance to survive. He was naturally indifferent, not only neglecting social intercourse, but also life. In his eyes, a person's life was no different than a dog's life. Since that was so, he spoke no more, and unleashed his saber. With the long saber in hand, his temperament instantly changed drastically from a cold crippled youngster into a reaper. Those cold eyes and the imposing murderous spirit shocked even Guang Yuan a little as the latter involuntarily cracked his fingers, feeling an impulse to kill this youngster as he felt danger. Ling Han. Lu Yutong called out lightly of nervousness. Hu Niu's eyes shone brightly. Ken Ye's murderous spirit made her feel a wisp of intimacy, but when she found that this murderous spirit was directed at Ling Han, the little girl instantly erupted fiercely, growling at Ken Ye. No, this opponent is mine. Ling Han smiled, and brandished his sword with a move reminiscent of a flower, his expression solemn. Ken Ye was certainly strong, even he had to be cautious. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.